brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFB-LP 101.
The Eau Claire City Council is now in session. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson? Here. Beaton? Here. Berge? Christofferson?
Here.
Emmanuel? Gregert?
Here.
Klinkhammer?
Here.
Lohr? Weld?
Here.
Worthman?
Here.
Jean? Here.
All right. Well, good evening to, those of us here in council chambers and those of us joining us remotely. And again, to my fellow council members who are also joining us remotely. This is our December 7th public hearing and public discussion. It is a virtual meeting of the Eau Claire City Council. And again, for those of you that would like to address the City Council this evening, you will need to join the meeting as an attendee on a computer, tablet, or smartphone using the link provided on the city website. The Eau Claire City Council conducts public hearings, listening sessions, and public discussion where residents in our community are invited and encouraged to ask questions and weigh in on important decisions we'll be making tomorrow afternoon and in our legislative session or in coming weeks and months ahead. We want to thank Valley Media Works for live streaming this proceeding. To watch, please visit valleymediaworks.org or visit channel 994 on Spectrum Cable. It is also simulcast at 101.9 FM, and you can find past meetings on your YouTube under the Chippewa Valley Media Works channel. If you plan to address the council this evening, I will briefly review the protocol. Once an agenda item is introduced, staff will present on that item, and following that presentation, the council may have questions to clarify an issue. We will then open the item up for public input. Once the item is open for comment, please raise your hand on the WebEx screen, and we will call on you in the order in which the requests to speak are received. When it is your turn to comment, I will unmute you and ask you to please state your name and address, and then begin sharing your comments. We welcome each of you to speak up to 5 minutes, and then I will ask you to bring your comments to a close. I will then ask you to lower your hand, and you will then be muted, or but are welcome to stay online to listen into the rest of the meeting or share a comment on any of the other agenda items or during our public commentary period. There are times when council members may have follow-up questions for you, so please give us a moment before disconnecting. Again, if you wish to speak on an item that is not listed on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. And lastly, if you're not comfortable speaking in public, you can fill out a comment form on the city website, and those comments will be shared with council members ahead of our legislative meeting tomorrow. As always, you can email and or call council members outside of this meeting, and our contact information can be found on the city website. With that introduction, we will get on to our first item on the agenda, which is a public hearing on a resolution approving a site plan in a P-Public district to allow for Phase 2 of the Transportation Education Center for Chippewa Valley Technical College. Good evening, Mr. Allen.
Well, the members of the council, I hope everybody can hear me okay.
We can hear you great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, again, before you this evening is a request to approve a site plan for the Transportation Education Center's Phase 2 of that project at Chippewa Valley Technical College, located at 3623 Campus Drive, which is the west campus of CVTC. The site plan that was submitted, thank you, For location purposes, item number 5 on the map here, again, the item numbers refer to the Plan Commission agenda item. The Plan Commission heard this item at their meeting last week, November 30th. The next slide, please. This shows the area that was directly notified of tonight's public hearing. And I should note that staff has not received any specific commentary from members of the public outside of the conversation at the Plan Commission last Monday. The next slide, please. This shows aerial photo, of course, of the overall West Campus with the Transportation Education Center proposed to be located at the top left corner northwest of the east site. The building that's related to this portion of the project would be 115,000 square feet in size. The area in question is noted in that kind of northwest portion, or essentially the overall northern portion would be most directly impacted. It's just over 17.4 acres in size of the overall 26.2 acre CBTC West Campus. You may recall phase 1 was proposed with the 176 parking stalls located to the south of the existing parking lot that's adjacent to the Energy Education Center. You can kind of see there kind of the flag tip of the, or the flag handle, as it were, of the notation PZ 2007. This was presented and approved by City Council at the meeting actually back in October. Move to the next slide, please. This shows the overall site plan as related to the expansion and both phase 1 and phase 2. You can see there that phase 1 listed as south lot with the hatch, the kind of dashed red rectangle around the phase 1, and essentially everything west of that north-south interior private drive is the kind of the area in question and before you here this evening. It's hard to read here, but hopefully it was legible in your agenda pack materials. The kind of breakdown of the parking lots and spaces related to the overall West Campus. So I'll get into that a little bit here in a moment. Move to the next slide, please. This shows some of the truck movements. Again, a large component of this project is obviously related to the again, transportation education, so related to some of their truck driver training, also motorcycle training, and related uses. So certainly showing all the truck movements that would occur on is what this slide is showing. Next slide, please. One item to be applauded as we move forward here into more winter months is a specific site plan showing proposed snow storage. So again, with City of Eau Claire being a winter mission city, it's exciting to see response to that, and the applicant was responsive to the request to provide some specific snow storage areas identified on the site. Over the next slide, please. Again, all these are in your materials. I just wanted to highlight some of the key items here. This shows essentially kind of the area that will be disturbed as a result of the phase 2 here. So it shows a little bit of existing conditions in terms of the vacant area that would be impacted as a result. Next slide, please. This shows a little bit more specifically some of the kind of the site work that would occur, some of the open areas that would be created as a result of the project. We can go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit more specifically showing some of the turf areas and other related ground cover. Next slide, please. This shows drainage as well. One question that did come up, and can highlighting that briefly, at the Plan Commission, some of the stormwater and some of the changes to the existing areas that currently provide for some of that detention and retention on the site. So again, as a result of the site plan, additional drainage calculations and plans will be required. Included in your agenda packet is a site plan approval letter, against a draft form with a number of conditions, and one of those conditions would be to provide drainage calculations and drainage plan to be approved by the engineering department. Along with that, in the next slide, please. Applicant did provide some general landscape parameters here. We can zoom in on the next slide. Shows that kind of boxed area there a little more closely. Again, just essentially a preliminary sketch of the specific landscaping related to the building itself and some of the walkways connecting it back to the Energy Education Center to the east. So again, a good schematic, but one of the conditions of approval staff's recommending is to provide a landscape plan with a little bit more specific detail as a result. Next slide, please. This shows the overall building type. The proposed plan calls for the main building to be single-story, designed brick, built up precast concrete panels with a variety of colors and textures you can see here. It's a little bit hard to see the variety of colors a bit out of the slide, but again, there will be some variation in some of the textures and colors to provide some interest on all four sides of the building. There will also be some corrugated metal panel accents, which again is, provide some interest and certainly point to kind of the overall use of the building itself as well. The building will also use light diffusing glazing, exterior decorative lighting, and include indoor-outdoor commons area at the main entrance. Go to the next slide, please. You can see that there to the left, kind of showing some of that the lighting effect being proposed with kind of a dusk or nighttime presentation here. Next slide, please. Shows that a little bit more daytime and a little more specifically focused on that commons area, outdoor area here, again looking into the indoor commons areas. Along with that, the building will also accommodate the learning center, classrooms, lab, a science center, and teaching shops. Site plan also does propose a storage building to house motorcycle training, program equipment, and maintenance equipment. Go to the next few slides, please. Again, a little bit of nighttime view from the north side. Next slide, please. Again, kind of bouncing back and forth, kind of nighttime, daytime, a little more close up of that outdoor commons area. Next slide, please. Nighttime again. And then next slide, please. Thank you. We'll stop here for a moment. Again, that storage building proposed, you can see that to the kind of in the distance on the right. Not much detail provided for that, but again, it's set back well off a public right of way and away from kind of main view of visitors and students on the front end. Again, the applicant did note regarding the landscaping. You can see here some of that in a more general sense being provided, but you can see even to the right, kind of a generic kind of a tree line or hedgerow there. So some additional specifics will need to be provided to meet the standards for more accurate landscape plans. Again, site lighting will be designed to meet city standards for the applicant as well. Again, with the lighting style to match existing campus lighting. Signage will include building signs on the north and eastern sides, as you saw in some of those earlier slides. Yellow signs will be submitted and permitted separate from this request, so really just looking at the building itself at this point. Parking, again, just more specific to that. Phase one, again, was that expansion of the parking lot to the south of Energy Education Center. Adding 176 spaces. Additional parking here will include a lot to the northeast, which is kind of what you're seeing where those cars are parked right in the foreground. And again, it's called the north parking lot, and so the other drawing, that's planned for 94 spaces. Total parking for the entire campus is planned for 573 spaces, which does sound like quite a bit. Again, they broke down those specifics in what was the first slide that we showed. But the applicant did, again, provide parking layout and calculations in your packet, and speaks to some of the classes, some of the off, or the non kind of classroom-related presentations and meetings and such that they often hold and host as well. So again, this phase also proposes additional 10 bicycle parking spaces in addition to 24 already provided. There's some discussion at Planning Commission about location of those. Again, that will be been identified to some degree, but will be finalized moving forward. With that, I'll kind of close with some traffic and transit. I know Toby City Engineer Leonette is on the line here as well, can respond to some questions if there are any on that. But again, there certainly will be some impact to traffic, but it's been proposed that there'll be about an additional 20 to 55 trips during the peak hours of the day, and it's been identified that the surrounding street system would have capacity to accommodate additional trips with minimal impact. In terms of transit, the site is about a half mile from the nearest bus stop at Folsom and Mercantile Drive. Project could generate some demand for transit use. One additional item that was added as a condition of approval by the Planning Commission at their meeting last week was to require a, for the specifics here, I want to say it correctly, a future sidewalk connection along the main drive to the public right of way. If we can, we've had a couple of slides. I think we can see those here. A couple more. We can come back to that one if there are questions. This shows the bicycle route that was originally proposed to go through the campus. That is intended to be kind of modified a bit to be a little bit more consistent with following along where the proposed trails dash B line along the frontage road and not specifically through the campus. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This shows, it's a little hard to see here, so it's faded. There is some text and an arrow pointing at it in the center of that blue dashed oval. But the applicant has provided already slightly modified drawing to show connection back to the public campus drive. Thank you. That's perfect. You can see that they're connecting from kind of the bottom of that blue oval up along the east side of their north-south campus drive into private drive up to the public right-of-way. The next drawing, we have the last slide, please. The next slide, which is the last that I have. You can see that there too is kind of yellow extension going from the blue interior connections up to that public right-of-way, so you can see a little bit more clearly with the field photo in play. So with that, there's some discussion at the Planning Commission as to whether that should be constructed now as part of this phase or be provided as a future extension as kind of the public right-of-way to the north there redevelops. And again, as showing that kind of that bicycle trail, kind of regional trail system starts to evolve as well, it would make that connection at that time. So with that, again, those conditions as noted. I think I covered most of the items presented by the applicant, but I did note and that a few of the applicant's representatives are on the line. Mr. Adam Whaling, Mr. Rod Bagley from CBTC, looks like they're on the line, and Mr. Brian Lambert from Ayers Associates Engineering is also on the line. So any three of those gentlemen, I believe, can respond to any questions or provide additional information as needed. With that, I'll see if any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Are there any questions from council for either Mr. Allen or for any individuals from the technical? Councilmember Gregert.
Thank you, President Weld, and thank you, Mr. Allen. I guess my question is for the applicant. This is actually something I didn't really notice at Planning Commission when we reviewed it, but I noticed when when I rode my bicycle over to the site on Saturday. Nice day. There's kind of an awkward intersection on the southeastern part of the proposed development where it's a four-way stop on Campus Drive, and one of the access points to the east is the parking lot for Energy Education Center, and then the western part of the intersection is into the area for training with big trucks and stuff. So I guess my question for the applicant is there a way to maybe make that intersection a bit more intuitive? Because it seems like there's pretty awkward placement of those stop signs, and obviously there's some turning movements we have to be aware of with regard to the trucks, but I guess I just wanted to see what you thought in terms of ideas to improve that intersection, because I don't necessarily see much for changes to it in the site plan anywhere.
Would any of the applicants be able to answer the question? If you could, just raise your hand if Mr. Bagley. Good evening.
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great. Thank you.
Great. We had some technical difficulties last week, but thank you. That's a fair question. That is kind of a busy intersection with truck drivers coming in out of that training area, as you can imagine, and students coming from the eastern parking lot. I guess my thought would be to, we could probably better mark the intersection with some crosswalks and some additional signage that would make it more obvious. I think that's certainly a fair assessment. I guess beyond that, I'm not quite sure what else we could maybe do, unless maybe Brian from Ayers has got some additional thoughts on other experience, other projects he's worked on in the past.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bagley. Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, President. I guess one of the things I know CBTC has been looking at future campus road improvements, and there's an existing fuel line directly west, a fuel island directly west of the Energy Education Center parking lot. Maybe the possibility when that fuel island is abandoned, that intersection could be squared up and made to function a little better in the future.
Okay.
And as Rob mentioned, maybe a little pavement marking for the stop signs and maybe crosswalks, especially on the east side where the parking lot expansion crosses the driveway.
Sure, thank you.
Are there any other questions from council in regards to this agenda item? Again, I will ask if there's any other questions. Not seeing any. We will open this up to the public. Is there anyone that's joining us remotely? Does anyone wish to speak to this agenda item? Again, I'll ask if there's anyone that wishes to speak to this agenda item. And again, Mr. Lambert or Mr. Bagley, if you could lower your hands unless you have another statement. Thank you. Seeing no other hands go up, we will move on to agenda item number 2, which is a public hearing on a charter ordinance relating to the City Council and the reapportionment of the aldermanic districts of the City of Eau Claire. Good evening, Ms. Repo.
Good evening. There are 2 annexations on the agenda for tomorrow night. One of them, the Eisenhuth annexation on Preston Road, it will require a new voting ward as it is in a different state assembly district than adjacent city property. This will create Ward 83 in Aldermanic District 4. There is a third agenda item that will also on the agenda that creates the ward. The charter ordinance adds Ward 83 to District 4. Please note that the Yang annexation on Orange Street does not need a new ward as it is in the same assembly district as adjacent city property. That annexation will be added to Ward 39. With that, I will take any questions.
Any questions from council for Ms. Repo? And I do not see any. Thank you. Well, let's see if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this agenda item. Again, I'll ask if there's anyone that wishes to speak to this agenda item. If so, please raise your hand on WebEx. Seeing none, we will close that agenda item. Move on to agenda item number 3, which is a public discussion on the 5-year transit development plan for the Community Services Department Transit Division. Good evening, Mr. Wagner.
Well,
Good evening.
So a transit development plan is required from the state of Wisconsin as part of their oversight of our system, where we assess our current level of service and our how we're performing, and to use this as a decision-making tool going forward. The council will be taking up the plan tomorrow to a resolution to approve the plan, and it does not bind the city into making any of performing any of the recommendations that are in the plan, but it is a guiding tool for the transit division and the transit commission. So tonight we have with us members of the SRF consulting team that helped us produce the plan, Joseph Capper and Jake Knight, and they will be giving a brief presentation. So Council President should allow them.
I'm sorry, so is Mr. Knight and Mr. Kohler, is that right? Or, well, I'm sorry, what were the names again?
Joseph Capper and Jake Knight.
Okay.
All right, it looks like I'm unmuted. Can everybody hear my audio?
We can.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, members of the council. My name is Joe Capper with SRF Consulting Group. I'm joined by my colleague Jake Knight, who served as the lead planner on the project. I served as the project manager for the consultant team, and I'll be giving a brief presentation this evening, walking through some of the key elements of the Transit Development Plan document, and we're also available here to answer any questions that members of the council or people providing comments may have. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So Tom gave a little bit of background on the overall purpose of the Transit Development Plan project. It is a requirement of urbanized areas throughout the country to do a 5-year plan that guides Eau Claire Transit service. Our objective here was to look at ways that we can best accommodate future growth in the Eau Claire region, look at change in the Eau Claire region and how transit service can suit that best. And in doing so, we evaluated the existing conditions, so both the underlying market for transit service, looking at a lot of demographic data about the community, economic information, as well as reviewing the performance of the transit system as well, both at a system-wide level and then looking at each route, understanding where the strengths are of the current transit system and where there's room for improvement. We also conducted a public engagement process, which we'll provide a little bit more detail on later in the presentation, to make sure that we understood the community sentiment toward transit service, where some of the greatest needs were, and look beyond some of that quantitative information that we analyzed in the existing conditions. Ultimately, our charge was to take that information and develop recommendations that are context-specific, reflective of local community needs, and have the greatest potential to ensure success of the overall transit system. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we conducted what we believe to be a robust public engagement process to gather meaningful input on the project. That included discussions with key stakeholders, but as well as meetings throughout the community. We tried to get a good cross-section of input from both transit users and broader members of the region that may not use transit, but still have valuable input onto the overall process. One of the things I want to mention here is that this project spanned the span of this project covered both before the COVID-19 pandemic and now during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we made a considerable effort to adapt our engagement strategy to accommodate socially distant ways of engaging in the project, and we're able to use some tools like virtual open houses. So we conducted several meetings via Zoom, very similar to this, on WebEx online, and we also were able to use several online mapping tools, a wiki map where people could identify places in the community where they wanted to indicate improvements for transit, draw their own bus routes, give input on pedestrian safety and places where future facilities might be developed. So we're happy with the input we got from those tools, but just acknowledging that we had a multi-channeled effort here to engage the public. We did conduct a couple of different surveys over the course of the work here, as I said, both including a passenger survey where we actually interviewed folks on board buses, as well as provided survey instruments at key transfer points and the like, and we also conducted an online survey for the broader community. We got a mix of about 40% of those survey respondents were regular riders, and the remainders were people who maybe were occasional riders or didn't use Eau Claire Transit at all. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we wanted to make sure, in casting a wide net for our engagement, we wanted to meet with as many people that were representative of folks who would benefit from better transit service as possible. Sometimes we made a good effort to reach those that are typically tough to reach in a process like this, but we wanted to also speak with various advocates and key stakeholders. So that included the school district, housing authority, people that worked in the economic development field, transit advocates, state agencies, and educational institutions. Next slide, please. There are several documents that are included in the report that summarize our engagement over the course of the project, but a few of the key themes that I wanted to highlight here that maybe were common across all those different channels of engagement was the value for transit in the community. We didn't really see, sometimes when we work in different regions, there might be people just don't understand the value of transit or don't see it as a vital part of their infrastructure. That's certainly not the case in Eau Claire based on what we've heard. The perception is generally quite positive, and people understand that it's an important part of mobility and overall infrastructure in the community. People that did not use transit, the primary reason why they did not use transit is that they viewed it as an inconvenient option. Whether that's due to travel time, transit service doesn't go where they want it to. That was probably the key theme across there of why transit was not used. In general, people that were current users had pretty good customer satisfaction, but did identify some areas for improvement, and that includes better serving workforce transportation needs. So when you think about different shift times or start and end times, making sure that we're able to take transit to job sites that might not start at that traditional 9 to 5 commuter time, retail or warehousing or the like. Adding Sunday service was something that we heard kind of across the board as a high priority. Also making on a similar line of thought, making updates to those evening and Saturday service improvements. We also heard a desire for more frequent service, and also if we could find ways to address different reliability concerns. One thing I'll say, and we can go to the next slide, is that the priorities varied by different groups, different members of the community, whether you're a student, whether you're a regular transit user, or whether you were, or whether you had a not reliable access to a vehicle, et cetera. And as part of this process, we wanted to do as much cross-tabulation as we could to understand how we can best serve different segments of the community, who rides which routes, and let that guide some of our improvements based on that. Next slide, please. So with that, after the assessment of transit service, assessment of community conditions, and then our engagement effort, we wanted to develop several recommendations that we believe are realistic. We have some that we've identified as near-term recommendations that are possible to implement on day one, as well as some that might be more long-term and require some additional investment from Eau Claire Transit and its partners. But in general, what we do when we embark on a service planning process like this is we take a look at those segments of bus routes that are low performing, may not see, in some cases may have an average daily boarding of 0 on a segment, or just generally have softer markets for ridership. We want to minimize redundancy in the system, so where routes may run too closely in parallel to each other, are not necessarily well coordinated, scheduling or route pattern wise. We understand that there are limited resources, and we want to make sure that we're using those resources wisely when we think about the geography that a certain bus route covers. We also want to make sure that bus routes are simplified, that the route system is legible, that it's easy to understand, that where you can have service going in 2 directions on a given roadway or major corridor, that we make sure that it's there. We also want to improve directness, and by that I mean reduce the number of loops and turns that a route makes that can add to travel time and sometimes lead to some of those convenience issues that we know we wanted to address. And moreover, we want to look at ways to increase frequency of service. So having buses run more often, make it so that people, when they are choosing to ride transit, it's not overly burdensome to plan and predict, and it improves the ease of use there. Next slide, please. So how we ended up implementing that as far as the plan recommendations go, we looked at several routes that we restructured, so changing the route pattern, changing where they go, consolidating and changing the routing of some service. We also looked at opportunities to extend weeknight and Saturday evening service and prioritize that based on which route and where they go. We also looked at opportunities to add frequency, so not necessarily changing the geography of a route or where it goes, but adding service where we think there would be additional demand on it. We also looked at opportunities to expand the service area to cover new destinations, as well as opportunities to add Sunday service and expand the weekend network of routes. Next slide, please. So this is a long document that we were able to produce in partnership with Eau Claire Transit with many different recommendations. I don't have time to go through all of them here tonight, but we'd be happy to answer questions later on in the presentation. But I thought I'd give a few examples of those types of recommendations that we do and how they are woven into the plan. One example of route restructuring would be what are currently routes 5 and 6. And these routes link the downtown transfer center with the mall area, a lot of the major retail and commercial destinations on the southeast side of town. Where our recommendation is here is to change the route pattern of Route 6 and eliminate Route 5. Now, we're not looking to eliminate the service to the areas that Route 5 covers, but by changing the route pattern of Route 6 and Route 1, we will better cover those areas. And it's a little bit tough to see on this map, but it's in the document as well. There are many areas on both of these routes where we saw very little ridership, and this is an opportunity to consolidate the service area, make the routes go where they're most needed, and also improve travel times between downtown and the mall, which was something that was consistently requested in our engagement efforts and in some of our survey responses as well. This provides better two-way service on both of these routes and reduces the travel time for each. Next slide, please. Another item that was specific to our scope was to look at service to educational institutions. This includes both K through 12 educational institutions, so Eau Claire School District and the like, as well as institutions of higher education in the region. There are a few ways that we looked at that. One was on the programmatic side, which is looking at things like fare incentives, programs and subsidies where you can work with partner organizations. That includes schools, enhancing the partnerships that already exist between institutions like UW-Eau Claire and the city for transit service, but also probably most importantly is looking at improving service to these institutions, because what we know is that the number one factor in determining increasing ridership is to improve the overall service product. So our recommendations here focus on enhancing service to these areas. Each planning scenario that we produced increased levels of service to Eau Claire area school districts, middle schools, and high schools. In particular, we looked at things like changing the time so that they better align with school start and end times, and adding over the overall number of trips that serve each school. We also looked at the current configuration of express service, and we were able to use some origin data to help inform our recommendations. And we also looked at an opportunity to utilize on-demand services and make those available, and from a programmatic perspective, make those available to students for certain trip purposes. I'll be reminded of a project we worked on in Janesville, Wisconsin, where it was evident that there were a lot of off-peak trips being made to and from schools for various types of appointments, day treatment, and the like. And we made some recommendations based on that to incorporate on-demand services or subscription-based services to help with that, and that can be an overall part of K through 12 ridership. Next slide, please. Very briefly, we also looked at making updates to routes 9 and 19, which are the routes that are focused on the UW-Eau Claire campus. This represents about 40% of Eau Claire Transit's overall ridership. In general, we wanted to make sure that we were addressing issues that were related to crowding. We didn't really have any major changes to routing or route pattern, but looked at scheduling and increases in service related to frequency. Generally, our feedback on this recommendation was very supportive. However, we acknowledge it would be a significant investment from funding partners like UW-Eau Claire and the like. Next slide, please. In addition to making updates to the various route patterns and looking at investments in frequency on certain areas, we also looked at the potential feasibility of on-demand service, or what was asked of us was an analysis of micro-transit opportunities. Basically, to summarize, we looked at areas where there might not be a mature enough market for fixed route transit service, where you'd want to run a route all day on a 40-foot vehicle or something like that. But there are areas that are lower density, maybe don't have a roadway network that is conducive to efficient transit service, where you could use smaller vehicles and invest in technology to support what is called microtransit or an on-demand service. The user experience would be a lot like Uber and Lyft, where people could hail a ride using a smartphone. It would be limited to certain zones in the city or times of day. And it's been successfully implemented in a lot of places throughout the country. We identified some specific areas where we think it has the greatest potential in Eau Claire. We also looked at areas throughout the city where, is there a fixed route that operates somewhere that maybe is not suitable for fixed route service and should be operated by smaller microtransit vehicles instead. We didn't really see that much opportunity for that. However, microtransit is something that can be applied very flexibly based on time of day or to accommodate certain peaks or low times. So while you might not want to completely replace a neighborhood service with microtransit because it just simply doesn't have the capacity, there are opportunities to apply it in a flexible manner. The other thing I would say is that other communities in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic are using microtransit service as a way of restoring ridership where it had been previously cut. So we wanted to discuss that as a general topic as well. Next slide, please. In addition to making recommendations on service, route, schedules, we also did some other assessments of and recommendations for the pursuit of technology investments like transit signal priority, fare collection and the like, customer-facing technology, as well as that detailed microtransit analysis that I just mentioned. We also did an assessment of fares and fare policy, just giving a policy framework for fare changes and recommending some potential subsidy programs that might support enhanced transit service. We also looked at facility needs and capital planning and incorporated things like fleet expansion and overall facility needs into the discussion of transit recommendations. Next slide, please. All of these recommendations were wrapped into 3 different scenarios. One is a short-term, minimal cost, in some cases cost-neutral scenario. That's probably the nearest term recommendation. I know this project was introduced as a 5-year plan, but we want to be mindful of a long-term vision and identify things that if funding or investment was available, we wanted to give a long-term roadmap for improving transit service and ultimately making investments that have a return that yields better ridership. So 3 different scenarios, 3 different kind of tiers of funding and investment, as well as administrative burden that ultimately helps the plan take shape. So next slide, please. To conclude, that is my very high-level overview of our transit development plan document. Both myself and Jake Knight have our various documentation handy right here. We'd be happy to take any questions from members of the community or the council at this time.
Are there any questions from council? Councilmember Berge.
For President Wells, I'm very intrigued by the micro transit idea. I think that's a really great idea. I just had a question about what kind of vehicle would be used. You said it'd be a smaller vehicle, so like a car or a van or a smaller bus. What kind of vehicle?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, I can answer that question. Typically, a microtransit service like the one we're describing here is operated by like a minibus. So a large van, minibus, something like that. You want to be able to carry probably a capacity of at least 10 passengers. That's typically what we've been seeing in other communities. We recently were working with the city of Green Bay on implementing their microtransit program, and that's about the size of the vehicle that they used. So similar to what might be on ADA paratransit or a shuttle bus type of thing like that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Worthman. Councilmember Worthman? Is there any other questions? I'm not able to connect with Councilmember Worthman. Councilmember Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, President Weld, and thank you, Mr. Wagner and Mr. Capper, Mr. Knight, for all the work on this. I do think a lot of the recommendations are really creative and helpful for us. One of the ones I'm still struggling with is this on-demand, concept, and obviously that'll take a lot of research if we decide to do a pilot of that or something. But the north side on-demand service for evenings and Saturdays seems like the most immediate possibility. And I guess the thing I really like about fixed route bus service is that you really know what time you're going to be arriving or being able to board a bus and stuff. And so that reliability of time, I'm just trying to get a sense, one of the things I think I've asked about prior to this too is, connecting to the transit center, it seems like the approach, basically be able to get picked up anywhere in the zone on the north side and brought to the transit center. And we have buses coming and going at 15 minutes after the hour and 45 minutes after the hour. And I'm trying to get a sense if you think that it would be possible to design the on-demand service so that you could actually connect to other buses at those points in time at the transit center. So maybe you could speak to, if you see that as a possibility and how flexible we would be potentially to do that. I guess that would be for Mr. Capper.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Gregor. So there are a lot of different ways that you can implement an on-demand transit system. I think you want to make sure that it's linked. If there is to be some type of timed transfer, that you're linking it to the highest quality, highest frequency service that's available. That minimizes wait times and it reduces the need for people to to plan their schedules around that. In my experience with working with communities and implementing this type of microtransit service, they do it in a couple of different ways. One, it's a zone, similar to what has been illustrated earlier in the presentation, where it would link to a transfer point out on the periphery of the community. Or given it can be a certain use case, a certain type of subscription trip, they can also make that trip all the way into a major transfer point, such as in Eau Claire would be either downtown or by the mall. It really depends on the level of underlying service available and the market that you're trying to serve. So I guess I'm not trying to evade the question by saying, well, it depends, but I think that's probably my straight answer as to how you it even varies in reviewing Eau Claire as to which zone you're talking about. I agree with you that I think ultimately fixed route transit is it's a predictable product. It can operate at a higher capacity. And you're figuring out how on-demand service can supplement and augment a good fixed route system is how I would put it.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Capper. Councilmember Worthman. Councilmember Worthman, we're still having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Capper, for the presentation this evening. Wanted to ask about fares. I saw that in the report, it seems comparatively to Wisconsin and to the U.S. that our fares are reasonably priced. And, I think one thing that's pointed out is K through 12 we've definitely seen a decline in ridership there. But had you explored the concept of zero fare, as I've seen some other communities in the United States doing, to try to increase ridership? It seems like the concept of being able to just jump on a bus whenever might be a way to open up a much broader ridership. And wanted to get your take on that concept and also just where fares are at.
Thank you for the question, council member. Yes, we did take a look at fares. We conducted an analysis of, as you mentioned, we conducted an analysis of Eau Claire Transit and its peer agencies. In general, both in-state and nationally, I think the overall fare structure very generally is in line with peer agencies. To your question about fare-free transit, this is something that has come up in a lot of communities that we've worked in, and our recommendation is generally framed this way when the discussion comes up. So number one, you're correct. If fares were eliminated, that would certainly, I mean, it's kind of a simple exercise in economics, that would probably draw more ridership. But the research that we've looked at has shown that if you are to make a decision between investing in a fare elimination, because their fares are one piece of the pie that is Eau Claire Transit's operating budget, versus taking that money and investing it in enhanced service, you typically get a greater return on your investment by investing in improvements to service, whether that's better frequency or some of the recommendations that we've outlined here. We definitely recommend also exploring programs, whether that is partnerships with school districts, major employers, things like that, fare subsidies, and looking for funding partnerships to bring in additional revenue and make fares free for the consumer when available. But when we're forced to prioritize these things, we always say that that better service is a greater determinant in whether people will use transit as opposed to just simply eliminating fares. Now, in an ideal world, you would do it all. You wouldn't have these funding constraints, and you'd make sure you have the best service possible at the absolute lowest fare possible. But generally, when you do engagement, you do research, affordability isn't necessarily the number one barrier, but the convenience of service rather is.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody who worked on this, to our consultant and Mr. Wagner and Ms. Tyler, who's newer to our team, for all of your work and leadership on this. Just a couple of questions. My first one is, I saw in the report that it's kind of chunked out, so short term with minimal cost scenario, and then another short term with moderate investment scenario, and then a long-term scenario. Once this plan is adopted, how will kind of the sequencing of implementation happen? So many times good plans, I guess the bad reputation that plans have are it gets approved and then it sits on a shelf. So what are the dreams and aspirations to make this work come alive? That's my first one. And then the second one is really around bus shelters. And I'm just wondering what your conversation looked like around that of having those bus shelters as a key component with public transportation to kind of ease the burden for people who are waiting, you know, if they've got arms full of groceries. And right now our shelters aren't exactly right in front of most of our grocery stores. And so just wondering what that looks like. So kind of timing and bus shelters.
Sure. Thank you, Council Vice President. I will, for a little bit of this, I'm going to defer to Tom Wagner, who is on the line, just to also get his input as well. But you're correct. I think it is we don't feel like we've done our jobs if we are providing you with a plan document that just collects dust for 5 years. The idea here is that a lot of these recommendations would be implemented, and not just look. We also didn't look at it just in terms of which recommendations are low cost or neutral cost. We tried to put this together in a logical sequence. So with any transit system, a lot of ultimately there's certain recommendations or expansion periods that require additional vehicles. Some routes are interlined with each other, so if you make one change on one end of the system, it has impacts and effects elsewhere. We did our best to address all of that to make sure not just we had several scenarios that made sense fiscally, but also operationally. As far as what happens next for the first steps of implementation, I will say that we did not anticipate during the first third of this project that we would be stricken with the pandemic. So I know that has probably made maybe some changes to local priorities and what funding might be available. I'll defer to Tom on answering the specifics as to what we're going to do next. I'll say this is a guiding document, so any specific change will likely be brought forth before this body again, or go through another public information effort for any type of major change. So I guess that's my response as far as timing and sequencing. And shelters were part of the capital plan here, and additionally, we provided some guidance on, what, particularly looking at high boarding areas, maybe either satellite transfer points or areas where we know we have a lot of passengers waiting near university campuses or large housing complexes or the like. Things that you want to include in those types of areas, and how shelters are also a part of the capital plan. So I would agree with you that any place where you're seeing greater than each system has different standards, but 12 to 20 boardings a day, something like that. That's an area where you might want to consider putting in a bus shelter. And if it's one of those areas that's a major transfer point or an area of high boarding, then you might want to have something a little bit more elaborate, a larger enclosed kind of vestibule facility with good customer information, dynamic signage, good waiting areas, heating elements, things like that are all things that are worth considering.
Mr. Wagner.
So Tom, I don't know if I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I might toss it back to you just for like initial steps that you might go through for as far as the implementation process.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Council Vice President Emanuel. That's an exciting part of this plan, I think, is we have an opportunity here, focus, we have a way to focus, and so our next Transit Commission meeting next week, we're going to talk about a work plan for 2021, and this document will be key in helping us develop that work plan. And I know at the last Transit Development Plan, we put together a work group that worked on it. It kind of fizzled out, and so that's my job. I look at that as my job to make sure that we stay focused on this, those recommendations. I think there's a couple of key recommendations in here that is looking to the future too, that are coming up with the Sonitate addition on the university campus, that will be going along Menominee Street. I know that's been delayed, but this plan addresses that. And also, there was a presentation to the City of Altoona Planning Commission for the elements of the plan that address the City of Altoona. So I know they have been looking at maybe adding some additional service. So this document will help us in that. So there's some key elements in this plan that we're going to implement in the near future, and then the work plan with the Transit Commission, and I see it as my job to keep us focused on, okay, let's
led with that I think key to this whole planning effort was really trying to do the best we could with that engagement process and involving anyone that might be a champion of these recommendations from the beginning. So I think from the steering committee that Tom set up internal to the city, but also included some key community stakeholders, all the way to the people that we met with throughout. Tom mentioned we also made a presentation, a detailed presentation to the city of Altoona for what their potential what recommendations would affect service in their community. I think it was very well received. So I think that's probably one of the more critical components of it as well, to ensure that things start to take shape. And this plan is intended as a framework. It always surprises me. I've done several transit development plans in communities like this, and some people change up the order sometimes, and there might be some surprises in the first couple of years that come up, and I think we try to give flexibility to allow for those opportunities to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Capper and Mr. Wagner. Is there any other questions from council? Again, any other questions from council? And I am not seeing any. We'll open it up to the public. If anyone wishes to speak to this agenda item. Mr. Roth, did you have a comment in regards to the transit plan?
Am I off mute? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes I do actually. Good evening, council members. My name is Dean Roth, and I live at 435 South Wilson Drive in Altoona, and my comments are on this development plan. I'd like to offer a note of support for the proposed Altoona route, which is part of the plan considered at the meeting tonight, and if I heard correctly, tomorrow night. Mr. Wagner and Mr. Capper mentioned the presentation to Altoona's Planning Commission. I'm a member of that Planning Commission in Altoona who viewed the proposed route when it was presented. The group was supportive of the proposal. I've been an occasional user of the transit system, and as a rider and resident of Altoona, I've seen some areas that I would consider underserved by public transportation, and I was one of those who went to the consultant's website and drew on the map, hoping to include some of these areas. The area of Devney Drive has a new residence facility intended to serve lower income individuals or families. I believe it's called Solace Circle. But the entire stretch of Devney is largely multifamily units, which would be a great addition to have on this type of a route. On the eastern edge of Altoona is Hillcrest Trailer Park, which also houses many families that could be benefited by the expanded route of public transit. The route as proposed and as viewed by the Planning Commission in Altoona would support this. So I'd like to add my voice of support to that new route as running into and through Altoona.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Roth.
Thank you.
Kimberly.
Hi. Good evening, everybody.
Good
President
evening.
Weld, council members. My name is Kim, and I just wanted to say thank you to everybody and their efforts on getting that put through. There are so many optimistic things within there that, as a resident, I completely appreciate as far as the extended routes, especially to the Solar Circle and Altoona. I know that there's some definite need in that. Northern areas of North Crossing. Sorry I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare, but I just wanted to kind of give my personal voice as far as, because I am a non-traditional student at the university and also a single parent of 3, and I personally am on Route 5, and so it's enhancing service on that line. I definitely would appreciate to kind of get some perspective. I have to walk 10 minutes to get to the bus stop, then take the bus another 40 minutes to get down campus, and then another 15 minutes to get to my building within campus. And so, improving some of that convenience is definitely appreciated. But I definitely do have to say that I don't know that enhanced service is just going to be enough. I know that we have, especially in the aftermath that's coming from COVID-19, a lot of residents that are economically challenged and low income, and I'm just not, I definitely know, because before, I currently benefit from the partnership between UW Eau Claire and Transit because I get my rides for free. Before that, as a single parent, I couldn't honestly even consider taking the bus as an option. It just was not a financially feasible option at all. And then so I kind of look at it kind of as a social justice issue, making sure that everybody has access to get to, their place of employment, to encourage, just people to get out and use public transportation. Personally, I like to look at it from an environmental position because I currently have a vehicle and I am able to transport myself places, and so thankfully, I don't want to see public transit as kind of a privilege-based service, which when I was a single parent, well, I'm still a single, but at the time, it just wasn't even considered to be kind of affordable. And so I definitely think that I appreciate all the work that went into getting this all put together and all of the enhancements and improvements. And I just wanted to kind of get my voice heard as far as, whether or not there could be some sort of application process to have these, economically challenged or low-income households not just apply for a reduced fare, but the kind of free fare, whether that's through partnerships or, whatever on the back end there. I'm not sure how everything works. I just wanted to kind of get my voice out there and just, give my opinion on that.
Thank you, Ms. Brueggemann. Could we get your address?
Sure, yeah. I live on 4906 Coventry Court.
Great, thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this agenda item? Again, I'll ask if there's anyone else that wishes to speak to this agenda item. And I am not seeing any. Thank you to everyone that helped with that presentation and to those that offered their thoughts. Agenda item number 4 is a public discussion on the comprehensive parking study update. Good evening, Ms. Ness.
Good evening, Council President Weld and Council members and members of the public. Thank you for allowing us to speak on the parking study. This is an update to the 2014 parking study. Was the consultant that was hired to help us through this process. In March of 2019, we started the parking study update and had numerous public outreach and surveys and input listening sessions throughout the next year and went into March of 2020. To give us a summary of the key findings, the process that we went through, and the recommendations, we have Nicole Chania with WGI on the line with us tonight, and we welcome Nicole.
Nicole?
Yes, I'm
Yes.
here.
Great. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, President, and thank you, Council, for your time this evening. As Leah mentioned, in 2019, WGI joined with the city to update a previous parking study, and the updates focused on 4 major areas. It was supply and demand, parking occupancy, public input and outreach, and technology. So today, as Leah mentioned, we're going to be discussing some of the key findings and recommendations of that study. Next slide, please. So for this study, we focus on 3 specific areas. One, downtown, the second area being the 3rd Ward, and the 3rd area being Randall Park. And each of these areas had different demand drivers, different supply, and so it was really important to look at these very closely and individually as almost separate little parking studies as part of the update. Next slide, please. In doing so, inventory was analyzed for each area. Looking at the inventory for all 3 areas, the current supply is primarily in Randall Park, in private parking lots, and city-managed lots downtown. This collectively makes up 65% of the total supply of parking within the city, as you can see from the chart to the right. Next slide, please. The second task of the study was to take a look at the occupancy by study area. Occupancy counts were taken in April of 2019. Occupancy is considered effectively full when it's greater than 85%. That's kind of a rule of thumb in parking. Anything over 85% starts to kind of give a perception that there's a little bit of a parking problem and that supply is limited or is an inconvenience. The first area that we looked at was downtown. Downtown showed a high occupancy in the morning. And on the map, you can see that high occupancy is reflected in red, which notes 91 to 100% utilization. The core area of South Barstow was at 89% occupied. However, the downtown private lots and city lots in on-street parking averaged 45% occupancy, which is considered relatively low and not problematic. Next slide, please. Next, we looked at the 3rd Ward. The 3rd Ward showed a higher rate of occupancy consisting of demand drivers from residents and the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. Occupancy was high in the mornings in this area as well. While the lots averaged 94%, the on-street averaged 46%. And as you can see from this slide, there was a lot, the transition from downtown was a little bit more gradual on the utilization levels, and the 3rd Ward is a little bit more drastic from the red to the green to the blue. Next slide, please. And lastly, Randall Park also showed high utilization in the morning. There were 3 main demand drivers for Randall Park: Mayo Clinic, the Eau Claire County Building, and the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire as well. Occupancy in this area was clustered. As you see, there's 3 different areas that showed relatively high levels of utilization. The lots averaged 66% utilization, and on-street averaged 33 collectively throughout the study area. Next slide, please. The next task was public listening sessions and an online survey. There were 3 listening sessions conducted throughout the study. The topics were consistent based on the location of the meetings. For downtown, there's a lot of questions in regards to the future of the Gibson Farrell Garage and the impact to the parking supply. Overall, within all 3 meetings in 3 areas, there was a common concern of the lack of parking enforcement in regards to on-street parking. And parking encouragement from the university, specific to the 3rd Ward of Randall Park, was also very thoroughly discussed in this meeting. In addition to the public listening sessions, we also conducted an online survey. The online survey was open for several weeks, and some of the highlights of the survey were listed here. Total respondents were 1,542, which is a really great response for this type of exercise. 30% of the respondents were visitors or employees of downtown. 83% of the respondents owned a vehicle, which tells us that our primary folks are driving to their destination, driving that demand up at this time. Less than 15% utilize public transportation per their responses. 60% of the respondents were affiliated with the university, and 50% of those said that they parked on street versus in private lots or lots assigned to them through permits. 70% of the respondents were comfortable with walking 3 blocks, and this is really important in regards to proximate and remote parking and managing that more efficiently. Next slide, please. So for the key findings, we summarized these findings based on operational categories. They're customer service, technology, policies and management, and supply management. So starting with customer service, there were 3 main key findings. The first being exploring the policy, there's a potential to improve the current policy specific to the parking needs and the user groups. Second, parking meters are often out of service. This was observed while we were on site in the field observations and also localized in some of the public meetings. Third, the potential to increase the public communications via marketing, a marketing campaign geared toward not only day-to-day parkers or those one-time destinations, but also larger event parking and communicate to folks where parking is available to plan their trip. Next slide, please. For technology, there were 2 key findings, the first being outdated parking controls and equipment for on and off street, and 2, the inability to capture parking data to aid in business making decisions for short and long-term parking planning. Technology is a tool in parking that allows us to really determine that demand, that user volume. So it's very important that the technology be up to par to be able to capture that data and apply it to do projections, especially given now as the pandemic has definitely shifted the demands of parking across the board. Next slide, please. Policies and management have some more lengthy findings. 1, parking management is managed across multiple city departments. Second, policies should be updated regularly and evolved to meet the change in demands. Parking's ever evolving, and we're seeing drastic rates of evolution given post-COVID. Third, the current management structure is not very conducive to support the longer-term parking policy and potential increase in demand. So as we look forward to growth, we need to think about that structure growing with the growth of the city. And then 4, prioritization needs to be given to policy in regards to the institutional overflow in the neighborhoods, which was a very common concern throughout all of our outreach meetings. Next slide, please. Managing the current supply will be critical for increased and demand management going forward. Things noticed as findings were the proximity of parking and destination. They really drive the perception of the available parking to the public, so it's important that we're communicating via signage, wayfinding, branding, and marketing to be able to manage that perception to the best of our ability. The meters used to manage the supply downtown weren't very consistent in their deployment, so when we were looking at the utilizations numbers, there was some inconsistency and some really hard changes from street to street, and that was attributed to some meters being present in lots and on street and some not. With the valet being at the Pablo Center and then utilizing the on-street parking, a valet ordinance should be explored just for a little bit more structured management going forward as at that time those events were growing and being higher demand. Next slide, please. So how do we close the gaps in these findings and gain some efficiencies for the city going forward? We divided the recommendations into short, mid, and long term just to review them based on priority for the city. For short term, the following recommendations were suggested to the city: a dedicated full-time parking manager, revamped policies and procedures, a parking rate study, establish goals specific to parking, customer service driven technology goals to be included example, LP hour or license plate recognition for enforcement, a dedicated parking landing web page just to serve as a tool to better communicate parking to the public, and a branding and marketing campaign. Next slide, please. And the following were midterm recommendations based on our findings. Leadership structure to include combining parking and enforcement for an overall organizational alignment. Strategic planning for the Gibson Farwell Garage and review of the current parking ordinance. Additional technology assessments for the parking access and revenue controls, as well as the parking meters. Implementation of LPR enforcement technology. Web-based mapping, utilizing GIS, which is something that we're seeing across the industry as a really great tool for static mapping. Updates of ordinances to include residential parking programs, and inventory of the downtown parking assets, just to be able to plan for refurb, upgrade, replacement, and so forth as needed. Next slide. Lastly, looking at some long-term recommendations in regards to the findings, putting together a strategic plan for 5+ years out will allow the city just to better plan and be a little bit more proactive in regards to parking, and allow for continued evaluation of the updates to ordinances, construction phasing and Parker impact analysis for the demo of the Gibson Farwell Garage. As we looked at the parking supply and demand, currently overall there were no major concerns. However, when you start taking that parking supply offline, and with the age of the garage, that's something that you want to plan very carefully and strategically going forward. So in closing, that summarizes our findings and recommendations for the 2019 parking study. Thank you for your time, and I'd like to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Chinia. Any questions from council? Councilmember Gregert.
President Weldon, appreciate the presentation tonight too. I guess my question would be about, I guess it'd be for Mr. Chinia, the Mayo area as a major institution that was studied as part of this, and the impact on the neighborhood. Could you give us a sense of how full the lots were at the Mayo campus when the study was done, or how that kind of plays into this? Because it seems like, the plan kind of leaves out a discussion of that, but it shows like a lot of parking on street right around Mayo. In my experience, I see, those lots not being full at Mayo, but yet the streets have a lot of parking on them. So I don't know if you could speak to that a bit, and just so we can have some context.
Sure. So you're absolutely right, Councilmember. In regards to the actual lots, based on the data that we were given for that and the count, the lots in that area were not highly utilized. It was the on-street parking where we were seeing attacks of parking supply. And that typically happens with permit programs, or if there's speed parking, employees will utilize the on-street parking before the lots that are assigned to those areas. And so when we talk about permit programs and managing the streets, it's specific to those areas, but up to the residential areas and spillover that can help manage those type problems for the on-street.
This just as a follow-up question is there what kind of, I guess I just don't know what the dynamic is in terms of where the public parks versus where the employees do, and if they need permits and stuff. It just seems like that type of thing should be written out in the plan just so we know what we're looking at. But yeah, so just curious about that. If you could maybe explain that before tomorrow too, or something, that might be helpful.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. In regards to how and just to clarify, in regards to how the hospital manages their parking?
Yeah, and I noticed it doesn't address that question is not addressed for the county government center. It's not mentioned, about the university as to their policies. It just seems like anyone who's looking at this plan who doesn't have direct knowledge of those institutions wouldn't know why, there's so much demand to park on street, because there's no explanation for what the policies are at the institutions. But that's just a general comment as well. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Noted.
Councilmember Berge.
President Weld, and thank you to the presenter tonight on the parking. I have two questions. You mentioned the residential parking programs, and I was feeling I know what it means, but I just want to confirm that does mean a parking permit for neighborhoods. And then I'm also wondering, in your public comment and intake and gathering, did people talk about that, and were they favorable? Is that something they would want to do, is a parking permit, so they would get a permit to park in front of their house? I know in Rochester, Minnesota, near their Mayo Clinic, they have the same kind of problems. That's what they have, and it seems like it's successful. So I was wondering what the residents think about that here in Eau Claire, especially by the university. And then just a quick comment or question too, I'll just put this out there. It seems like the mornings are the most busy, if I understood your presentation, and I was wondering if you, in different areas, I'm wondering if you knew why that was.
So to answer your first question, Councilmember, the residential parking program would institute the issuance of parking permits to park in front of the residential areas on street. This is something that we, in all of our, out of all of our meetings, the residents attended most to provide feedback. And they were in favor of some type of managed program. And there was a lot of different things discussed, from installing parking meters on the street to permit programs. We talked about how La Crosse is doing some residential parking programs to help better manage the problem. So there was no feedback during those public input sessions in regards to a residential parking permit program. To answer your last question in regards to the AM peak, it didn't have a downtown setting. Well, yes, it was consistent across that there was a higher peak in the morning, but that's attributed to the demand drivers in that area. So, for example, downtown, you have your business and employees who are usually working, daytime hours. For the third ward in Randall Park, that's a more school, institutional, business type setting. So you have students coming to park in the morning, you have county workers coming to park. And so healthcare, usually you see more of three types of groupings of demands as far as like the shifts, morning, mid, and evening shift. But the consistency is just due to the demand drivers of those areas being more of a daytime utilization.
Any other questions from council? Any other questions? And I do not see any. I will open it up to the public, and if there's anyone that wishes to speak to this agenda item, please raise your hand on WebEx. Again, if there's anyone that wishes to speak to this agenda item. And I am not seeing anyone. Thank you, Ms. Chania and Ms. Ness, and for the presentation and for all your time and work on this study. With that, we will move on to agenda item number 5, which is a public discussion on an ordinance temporarily amending the City of Eau Claire Employee Benefits and Leaves Plan. Good evening, Ms. Selton.
Council President Weld and members of the council, can you hear me okay?
We can, yes, thank you.
Okay. This ordinance proposes to continue 4 temporary leave policies adopted as part of the city manager's emergency powers this spring to provide employees with additional temporary leave options in the event of an exposure to someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 or if they have symptoms of COVID-19. These current temporary relaxed leave policies are set to expire on December 31st of this year, if not extended by the City Council. Can we have the first slide, please? Okay, first, the ordinance proposes an amendment to Employee Handbook Section 3.04, which is the sick leave provision. And this would be to continue the emergency paid sick leave, or EPSLA we call it, benefit. When Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act back in March of 2020, the city extended 80 hours of paid sick leave to all full and part-time city employees, whether they were designated as an emergency responder or not. The purpose of the EPSLA leave is to encourage employees to stay home when they have symptoms that could possibly be COVID-related, or when they are identified as a close contact of someone who has tested positive, without first drawing down the employee's personal accrued sick or vacation leave balances. It is work to cushion the financial blow to the employee of quarantining for 14 days and encourages voluntary compliance with quarantine or isolation recommendations. Between March of 2020 and the end of November, over 100 city employees have utilized paid EPSLA leave for a total of over 5,200 hours. So it has been a very successful program and has been very widely used. It's unknown at this time whether Congress intends to extend the FFCRA and the EPSLA leave provisions into 2021. There is speculation that they will. An extension of EPSLA leave was included as part of the HEROES Act that was passed by the House of Representatives back in May, but the Senate has yet to take up the measure. The HEROES Act would seek to extend the FFCRA or the EPSLA provision through the end of December 2021. Next slide, please. Second, the ordinance would seek an amendment to that same leave provision in the Employee Handbook, Section 3.04, sick leave, and this would extend the ability of employees on a one-time basis with supervisor approval to maintain a negative sick leave balance of up to 2 work weeks in the event of a quarantine or isolation situation when the employee's current sick leave and vacation balances have been exhausted and EPSLA leave has been exhausted and the employee cannot work remotely. This advance of paid sick leave must be paid back if the employee terminates their employment with the City of Eau Claire prior to the advanced benefits catching up with the earned benefits. Only 1 or 2 employees so far since March have utilized this benefit so far in 2020, but we have had several individuals who have been found it necessary to either quarantine or isolate more than one instance. So each time someone quarantines, if it's for a 14-day time period, it eats up on leave balances very quickly. So the employee had the benefit of the EPSLA leave, their own sick and vacation leave balances, and then if they exhausted those benefits, they could go negative up to 2 work weeks in their sick leave. Next slide, please. Third, the ordinance would seek a revision to Employee Handbook Section 3.01, again, a temporary revision to the vacation policy. This proposed provision would extend the ability of employees, similar to the sick leave, on a one-time basis with supervisor approval to maintain a negative vacation balance of up to 2 work weeks in the event of a quarantine or isolation situation when the employee's current vacation and sick leave balances have been exhausted, their EPSLA leave has been exhausted, and the employee can't work remotely. The same payback provisions would apply in the event the employee leaves employment before paying back the full monetary obligation to the City of Eau Claire. So far in 2020, no employees that I'm aware of have utilized this benefit, but it is out there as a safety net for employees in the event, especially if they're a newer employee and haven't built up a large vacation or sick leave balance to date. Next slide, please. And then finally, the fourth provision of this proposed ordinance would seek a temporary amendment to Employee Handbook Section 3.11, which is the unpaid leave provision. And it would provide, continue that practice that in an instance where an employee has no option other than to utilize leave without pay because of a COVID situation, this proposed ordinance would permit the employee to continue their benefits without having them prorated based on the number of days not worked. So the city's current practice is if you use unpaid leave, then the employee is responsible for paying a prorated portion of their health insurance and other benefits that they've elected. And this proposed temporary relaxation of that policy would permit those benefits not to be prorated. And I'm not aware of many employees so far this year, since COVID in March, that have utilized this benefit provision so far. But again, it does provide that safety net in the event all leaves have been exhausted, and it takes that financial burden off if employees aren't able to work because of an extended COVID situation, and then not have to worry about paying a prorated portion of their health insurance or other benefits. So in closing, this proposed ordinance would be effective from January 1st, 2021 until June 30th of 21. So for 6 months, unless rescinded, modified, or extended by the council. And with that, I can answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Ms. Selton. Are there any questions from council? Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try turning on the video. Good evening. My computer was going my iPad was going crazy. It was making people talk fast and slow earlier, so turned off my video. I want to just start off by sharing that I think this continuation of essentially the third part that you talked about of benefits would not be temporarily prorated during that COVID-related leave time, I think that's excellent. I have some reservations around, even though I think it's a good idea to make another option, all options on the table are good, but basically to allow people to accrue negative leave time. My sense is it's kind of like leave debt that they're creating, and so like once we get out of COVID, if somebody wanted to take a vacation just because who doesn't want to get the heck out of here, they might not be able to because somebody in their family was quarantined, they had to take care of somebody, et cetera, and they had basically that's where I coined the term leave debt. If Congress passes something that would kind of negate us having to create this, I guess what happens if there's another type of leave provision that's created? I guess you guys would come back to council. But I guess the other question would be, has there been any discussions around just creating more of a COVID leave benefit so that somebody doesn't have to go into debt? Let's say they exhaust, you set that same criteria like you have now, instead of going for a negative leave balance that with supervisor approval or city manager approval or somebody, that they would be eligible for more COVID leave. I'll give an example of why I think that could be really important. Let's say, this is a real scenario. I will definitely keep names out of it. A family gets, one person in the household gets diagnosed with COVID. The other person in the household is obviously a close contact, needs to quarantine, but their quarantine may not start. If they never test positive, their quarantine may not start until the last day of that person's, diagnosis with COVID. So they could, in theory, be home for 20 days. Because that's just the way the cookie crumbles. So thinking about scenarios where people really are being good actors, they're trying their best in a terrible situation, there another way we could approach it without basically forcing people to go into a negative leave balance by creating more leave?
The city does currently have a robust vacation donation program. So in the event that an employee doesn't have accrued balances available, employees of the city can donate any excess vacation that they have to employees, and that has been done quite often to get people through those, those situations that are of an emergent nature, not planned for and just, unfortuitous timing. But we've had a lot of people step up and donate their vacation, and then that doesn't put any onus on the employee to go negative, or so it's always something that employees, I think, would look at rather than go negative, and that's kind of borne out by the fact that not many people have had to go negative because the EPSLA leave has been sufficient, and then the vacation donation has been sufficient. But I think at the time these emergency leaves were, these relaxed leaves were adopted as part of the city manager's emergency powers. I think it was just to give employees some, that feeling of a safety net that, there are, we're willing to work with you, if you have to go negative, we're willing to let you do that. So I don't know if that, specifically answers the question, but I mean, at this point, I've been trying to do as much looking, and kind of speculating as possible as to what, could happen, going into 2021 with Congress and what's been proposed or what could be proposed. I know there's a lot of paid leave provisions out there that are talked about, but I think the most likely thing that's going to happen would likely be that extension of the EPSLA leave, because it has been found to be effective, and it has actually helped slow the spread, because it does encourage people to stay home and not come into to work when they're not feeling well, and it gives them that that time off with pay.
If the council president would allow, I'd have a follow-up.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. I think it does answer my question as far as kind of advancing what's on my mind from a policy perspective. What I think about, even though it's very generous for somebody to donate their vacation time, like that's vacation they're not going to take now because they have been benevolent during an emergency situation. So I guess what I'm thinking, in most scenarios, if somebody were taking leave and they were gone from the department, again, most scenarios, the department has already budgeted for that person's salary. So some cases you may need to retain outside, private services for something, if, depending on the employee type. But for the most part, a department has already allocated for a year's worth of salary for that individual. So it's not like a department, for the most part, is out of funds. It's really like they could financially absorb it if there were additional leave for this type of emergency situation. I guess you can tell I'm thinking about this, that just trying to get out of, again, in this pandemic situation, not for everything at this point, but just get people out of kind of leave debt. I don't have a better phrase, but maybe we can talk more tomorrow.
And that could also be accomplished by, the up to 2 work weeks or the 80 hours was the original, FFCRA EPSLA provision, but, maybe, going forward, that 80 hours could be, up to 3 weeks. It's always a possibility.
Yeah, I think, it's such an interesting time that we have right now of just kind of waiting between, huge changes in, political parties and all of those dynamics and seeing, what's going to happen. So I think it seems timely that you need some help from council to get this passed before the end of the year so that you have them effective January 1, since it's our last council meeting. And then I think just really staying attuned to what is the reality of what is happening. We should know, I hope, early January, by February at the latest. And so, it's possible we could even, if it's not sufficient, council could take it up and make it retroactive, if it seems like employees are still, if council feels like from a policy perspective, something more generous needs to be given. that seems like that could be a possibility.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Any other questions for Ms. Selton from council members? And I am not seeing any. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to this agenda item from the public? Again, if so, please raise your hand. Anyone that wishes to speak to this agenda item? And I am not seeing any. We will close the public discussion portion of the meeting and move on to our public comment period. For those of you that wish to speak to this evening during the public comment period, please click on the icon to raise your hand. I will call on you in the order in which they appear on my screen. Please state your name and your city of Eau Claire address. Again, the public comment period is for those living or working in the city of Eau Claire. Please note that your comments should be regarding issues or concerns of citywide application, and please do not comment on issues that were on tonight's agenda, as council wants and needs to hear those comments during the notice public hearing or discussion. Also, please be aware that during this public comment period, council members are not allowed to ask questions or comment on your remarks, so please do not misinterpret our silence. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak during a public comment period? And I see I have a hand raised. Just a few more items in regards to the protocol. You will have 3 minutes to speak. I will alert you when you have 30 seconds remaining, and then I'll ask you to bring your comments to a close. This comment period will last for 20 minutes unless it is the wish of 2/3 of the council to extend it. Mr. Kohler.
Yep, Joe Clare with Eau Claire Youth Hockey. PO Box 1592, Eau Claire 54703. What we're concerned about is with some, and I kind of emailed out to the city council last night, is Hobbs Ice Center. With that currently closed until December 8th tomorrow, which you guys redeem and kind of determine how that moves forward. Some issues we're running into is obviously, I can't speak for other user groups, but at least speak for youth hockey wise. I mean, we have not shut down. We have continued renting ice in Chippewa, Altoona, Menominee. The user groups we have want to keep playing hockey. With Eau Claire schools up, back and running, we'd like to think we can try to get Hobbs back up and running. The other thing we talked about was the mental health aspect of kids getting them active back on the ice and just kind of somewhat back to normal in these difficult times. One of the things that I'm not sure you guys are aware of is with the Eau Claire School District, they're actually busing kids to Chippewa, Menominee, which costs extra money for the school district. I did send you guys our budget that we spent at Hobbs Ice Center the last 3 years. And the user groups that have spent money, there is a link on there that talks about the proximity with body contact, with hockey, with social distancing. When we talk about the revenue of Hobbs, as you can see, Eau Claire Youth Hockey is the largest revenue resource of Hobbs Ice Center. Starting from 2017 to current, our revenue has gone up every year. This year we're probably projected to be in that 160, 165 range of spending at Hobbs. So there is a demand of Hobbs Ice Center. Instead of giving these other cities and communities the resources and money we're giving them, we'd obviously rather spend it on Hobbs. Since Hobbs shut down on November 18th, Eau Claire Youth Hockey has rented about 49 hours of ice between Chippewa, Altoona, and Menominee at a tune of about $8,575 that we spent at those facilities. That's going to keep going up as long as Hobbs is shut down. What we like to try to do is figure out how to come together as a group to get Hobbs back up and going. I know that O'Brien Rink is still down. I know Ackbrick Rink still has ice in it. And the O'Brien Rink has a part that at one point I was told that was on order. Now it's not. If cost is an issue, we've talked about Utaki, paying for that part as long as we can get ice credit down the road to recover that money. So I don't want that to be an issue with the O'Brien Rink being down.
Mr. Collar, Mr. Collar, you have 30 seconds. If you could wrap up, that would be great.
What's that?
You have 30 seconds. If you could wrap up your comments, that would be great.
No, I guess we just need to figure out what we can do to get Hobbs back up and going. So whether we sit as a group and talk, Hobbs shut down, and it was more of an email that came out, and user groups weren't too involved with that conversation. But we just want to make sure how we can keep Hobbs up and running, and what the policies that Hobbs and the city set for us to, when the homeless shelter left Hobbs, to use Hobbs Ice Center, we were fully abiding by those rules. Hobbs is probably one of the strictest rinks around the area compared to the 3 communities.
Sure.
Now, you're taking that safety net that you guys had for us, high schools, and probably university, and probably the figure skating club. You're taking that safety net away, and now we're forced to use other communities that have less restrictive safety measures in place. And we're still coming back to our hometowns. These are, tax-paying people of the community that understand we need to work together with you guys to do the right things.
Yep.
And we just want to see how we can accomplish that together.
Yep. And we will, again, part of this process with the public comment period is someone will be in touch with you maybe as soon as tomorrow, and we can continue that discussion if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay. I appreciate you calling in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak during the public comment period? Again, I'll ask if there's anyone else that wishes to speak during the public comment period. And I'm not seeing anyone. With that, we will, I guess, bring to an end our legislative or our public hearing and public discussion and public comment period for the evening. If there is no objection from council, and I am not seeing any, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Oak City Council is now in session. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God. Liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson? Here. Beaton? Berge? Here. Christofferson?
Here.
Emmanuel? Gregert?
Here.
Klinkhammer? Lohr? Weld?
Here.
Worthman? Zhang? Here.
And Ms. Riepel, just so you know, we may need a call back on the votes, just because I don't think everyone came through during the roll, but obviously you're getting them. So
Council members Klinkhammer and Lohr are the only ones that were not here. I will announce the votes at the end.
Okay, thank you. And I know Councilmember Klinkhammer just had to step away for a minute. So, all right. Good afternoon, and thank you for those of you joining us from home and remotely, and to my fellow council members. Again, greatly appreciated that we're all here together in one way, shape, or form. Again, to staff and those that are joining us here in chambers, and Councilmember Christopherson. Again, want to welcome everyone to our December 8th legislative session of the Eau Claire City Council. Thank you for those that weighed in last night during our public commentary period and our public discussion. And during our legislative session this afternoon, the council members will be participating either remotely or in person to deliberate and take action on the agenda items before us today. City staff and council members have spent a great deal of time preparing for this meeting, and I have a sincere appreciation for their continued work and dedication to this community. I also want to thank Valley Media Works and their staff for live streaming this meeting. To watch, please visit valleymediaworks.org or visit channel 994 on Spectrum Cable. The first item on our agenda is the COVID-19 update from Interim City Manager Solberg. Good afternoon, Mr. Solberg.
Thank you, Council President Weld and the rest of the City Council. Good afternoon. Again, we have our bi-weekly COVID-19 update. The slide that we have on the screen is, again, the location of the most up-to-date information that the public can have regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. There is it's easy to find if you do a search on the internet with the Eau Claire Coronavirus Hub, and there's also a Facebook page. The Health Department gives a live update Thursdays at 3:30. And that is visible on YouTube and on Facebook. And then the next one, some of the numbers that we've had since the last 2 weeks, we're up to 8,207 cases. Previously, that was 7,336, so an increase of about 900 cases. The rate of positive cases is slowing. We've had 63 confirmed deaths in the community. That is an increase of 7 from 2 weeks ago. 7 deaths is tragic. The previous update 2 weeks ago was 25. So the numbers for our fellow citizens dying are decreasing a little bit. Cases that were ever hospitalized are up to 257. That's an increase of 26 cases from 2 weeks ago. And we currently have 885 estimated active cases in the community. Of note, last week's update, there was 1,996 active cases. So we have 1,100 fewer active cases estimated in the community than we did 2 weeks ago. And on the next page, we're averaging approximately 50 new cases per day. 2 weeks ago, that number was 155. We've had 16 new outbreaks in the past week. Last update, there was 20. So those numbers are still very high. They're much higher than what we would like to see and what are considered manageable. But they are showing a good positive reaction to some of the efforts that have been taken lately. Our positivity rate still remains extremely high, and the COVID activity level for Eau Claire County is very high. Again, we've had 7 additional deaths over the last 2 weeks from COVID. And with the 257 that have been hospitalized, the last update, this is a 26 person count from 2 weeks ago. The previous update, that was 69, an increase of 69 over the 2 week period. So the number of people being hospitalized is trending downwards, as well as the number of deaths in the community. So those are the key takeaways from where the numbers are at. It's by no means a reason to relax. I think it's a reason to to realize that the efforts and the seriousness that we have taken and the community has taken to try and combat this pandemic are having a positive effect, and we're starting to see decreased disease as a result of that. I guess one more slide before I get to a few summary items. Legally, the state of emergency is still in effect until January 19th, 2021. At the statewide level, the statewide mask order is in effect, concurrent with that declaration of emergency. And the governor had a list, an executive request that was released that had to do with social distancing and gathering sizes and behavior that is reflected in our local health expectations as well. Those remain in effect and are advisory at this point. As far as city operations, City Hall will remain open to walk-in appointments only through the end of the year. We'll revisit City Hall operations after the first of the year when numbers are reevaluated. And Hobbs Ice Arena, there has been much discussion with Hobbs. A press release went out today that there are some mechanical repairs that were unanticipated that occurred or became evident this last week and a half. So the parts have been ordered and preparations have been made to repair Hobbs. And we're hopeful that when the repairs are made, if the coronavirus numbers are still trending in the same direction, we'll revisit, and we're optimistic we'll be able to open Hobbs towards the end of the year or early in January. With that, the city forces are assisting the vaccination or the testing efforts wherever we can, and we're being flexible with our staffing to try and assist with vaccination efforts that will begin next year and help the public health department with anything that they can. We do have Health Director Liska Giese on as well. And Liska, I'm not sure if you have some additional comments.
Good afternoon, Liska. Ms. Giese.
Good afternoon, Council President Wells and Mr. Solberg. Thank you for that overview. I would really only add a couple of highlights related to some of the current opportunities and some of the current challenges that we have. First of all, to note that we are seeing really a dramatic decrease in the number of cases, and that's good news. So I think an opportunity to celebrate that. I think also an opportunity to pause and also know that our testing rates are significantly lower the last 2 weeks. So we are doing some work to make sure that people continue to understand that getting tested is critically important, and making sure that testing availability is adequate. The National Guard testing site that many of you may be aware of that was going to end this week originally has been now, that deployment of National Guard for that purpose across the state has now been continued through the end of March. So as Mr. Solberg indicated, we have been working with a lot of city and county staff to look at a potential alternate site for that testing location, and hopefully we'll have that soon. Winter weather has provided some challenges with the current site that we are at. We also, the state followed the CDC guidance that came out at the end of last week related to making really what is the first alteration in the big picture look at isolation and quarantine for this specific disease. With more data available, the quarantine period, the amount of time that an individual needs to stay home after being exposed to someone that is COVID positive, the guidance around that has been adjusted as of the end of last week, and it started in Wisconsin being implemented on Monday, so just yesterday. There's a lot of detail around that quarantine change, and it impacts all of our business entities, our schools, our government entities. And so there's still a lot of work being done to make sure that the right information is available on that. Opportunity to potentially decrease the amount of time people are in quarantine from 14 days to 10 days, or in some circumstances down to 7 days. All of that remains in place when we have the ability to make sure that people are distanced, that 6 feet distance remains in place, and cloth-based coverings are utilized. So a lot of work around that issue, but it does give some level of ability for our partners to potentially have people returning to work a bit sooner if they can make sure the other things are in place. We also, as Mr. Solberg indicated, are working with the state and with partners across the county as we start considering vaccination plans. A very small amount of vaccine will be available across the state yet this year, but we know then that there will be vaccine available in the 6 months following that or longer to really vaccinate our entire Eau Claire population. So a lot of work is happening there as well. I would highlight for the City Council, first of all, thanks related to the work that the city staff has been doing to partner on moving all of the efforts forward across the community. That has made an enormous difference. We do know that there will be state and federal funding decisions made and policy decisions made, and do want council to be aware that at a state level and a federal level, those decisions will have an enormous consequence on how we can successfully manage COVID-19 in Eau Claire over the next number of months. So we are watching that closely and definitely providing input on some of those state and federal funding and policy proposals. I think I will leave it there and certainly can answer questions. There is a lot of activity, as we expected, over the time between the holidays, and we're hopeful that if practices can remain the same, that our case numbers can remain low, but certainly are looking at testing and at the upcoming winter holidays for many, Christmas and Hanukkah and other holidays that happen at the end of December. So we're watching that carefully as well.
Thank you, Health Director Giese and Mr. Solberg. Are there any questions from Council? Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. Ms. Giese, thank you for the update. I am wondering if you could comment a little bit on our healthcare capacity. Thank you.
Certainly. The tracking of healthcare capacity happens at a regional level every day. We get updates, but also we get regular updates within Eau Claire County. The hospitals are managing the care that is needed for both COVID patients as well as non-COVID patients, and we have an enormously dedicated and positive healthcare system here. They're covering that for the region as a whole, people coming to Eau Claire for that care. At the moment, we are in what is considered a cautious space with our healthcare capacity. It is not in the red anymore, which is good news, but we are carefully watching that at the moment. And I know it will make a difference if we can keep our case numbers low. The likelihood of hospitalizations again going up and deaths going up will be much less.
Councilmember Worthman.
Thank you, Council President. I actually have two different questions. The first one for Ms. Giese, and thank you for the report this evening. I just wanted to ask about vaccines and what we can kind of expect in terms of the coming weeks and months. I assume that, like other areas of the country, that we'll have some coming to healthcare workers and others who most critically need them in the next few weeks, and hopefully more in January. Is that still the plan?
Certainly. Thank you for that question. The vaccination strategy is very much a tiered approach. The federal government and the state government have supported the plan to move forward with healthcare workers and long-term care employees as well as residents as being in that first tier. So we expect that when the final decisions are made at the state, and that likely will happen sometime after Thursday, that those groups will be in the top group to receive vaccine. We also know that there are many, many people that are that would be that population, and we will not get sufficient vaccine. So it likely will take us a good amount of time in the state to even vaccinate that 1A group. You may hear about 1A, 1B, 1C. Those are the priority populations that initially will receive vaccine. 1A is right now looking to be healthcare workers, so those people that are directly working in hospitals, as an example, and long-term care facility employees as well as residents. Following that, in the 1B group and the 1C group are essential workers. Again, defined, the definition for that will be coming from the state following federal guidance. And then following that group will be those people that are over the age of 65 and those people with underlying conditions. As you can imagine, there are lots of people in those groups, and there will be lots of decisions about how to prioritize within those groups. And that will be primarily happening at a state level. They will allocate vaccine out locally within a rubric that they are developing.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful, thank you. And then my other question, Council President, if it's the right time, was around the Hobbs Ice Arena, and just I saw an update come today from interim manager Solberg, and just wanted to follow up on that, sort of the line of questioning and the input that we received last night from the hockey group. And I think, I had a question also for our finance director, Jay Winsend, about some of the issues around the finances of that too. And so I guess, I don't know if there's going to be a time when we're going to get more of an in-depth update, but wanted to kind of ask a little more information about that too.
Mr. Solberg, did you want to post?
As far as the finances with Hobbs, there was a question that was in an email related to transit funds, since we're on transit funds, if they were used, and the transit funds were not used for any of the repairs at Hobbs. It is true that the revenue going into Hobbs in our rec division in particular is down this year because we haven't had our rec programming, we haven't been able to lease ice time. We did also have a reduced cost because we did not have to hire the seasonal employees and the labor effort that goes with those. So the funds that the city have, they fluctuate slightly from year to year. So I think the projected funds, and we're not through the end of the year for Hobbs, is probably different than what was originally budgeted for, but transit is different also. The transit fund is different. There was additional federal funds that weren't anticipated at the beginning of the year. So they all balance out with the general fund, or help to balance out with the general fund in the end. As far as the specifics with the Hobbs finances, that's something that we would be able to provide. We have financial transparency, and we'd be able to provide budget reports on that if requested.
Yeah, that's helpful. And then just in terms of the operations of it, is my understanding that really right now it's sort of that there needs to be capital expense and some updates that have to happen in order for it to be operational?
Correct. There are a couple of HVAC units, heating, ventilating, air conditioning units, that need to be replaced prior to it entering service for ice time. So it was just it was a bad, it was an unforeseen expense that we had, bad timing, that when our coronavirus numbers come down, then we have mechanical failure. But the caller referenced last night, he wasn't sure if they had been ordered or not. And as prior to last night's meeting, those parts were ordered and we were making plans to repair and get hobs ready to go when it's safe to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful. And just to give more context, this is an issue that a few residents had contacted me about over the last couple months, and I had kind of encouraged the president of the Hockey Association just to share their concerns and some of their questions. So I think hopefully with the answers that were provided in the press release, that the hockey parents and users and the association gets a better understanding of where things are at. So thank you so much for weighing in on that. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Are there any other questions for Health Director Giese or Mr. Solberg? Councilmember Anderson.
Yes, thank you, Council President. Just a follow-up for Interim City Manager Solberg, continuing on the questions regarding HOBS, because I've also received some email communications about this. And going forward, I understand there's a press release, and there may be some attempts to kind of work on communicating with some of these user groups. Do you have any thoughts about what those types of communications would look like, or how someone that had concerns what the best way to approach that would be?
Sure. Well, I had two immediate thoughts. The first is that we do communicate with the people that reserve the ice time. So we would encourage the groups to improve their communication also, to make sure that all of the user groups, because we don't have the direct contact information for the parents and the different coaches, so we rely on that point of contact. But if there's something that we can put somewhere on the rec website, or have it available, so we just have a status update at HOBS, and it could be something as simple as HOBS operations are normal. HOBS are, I don't know if it would be a yellow zone, a green zone, or a red zone. Coronavirus numbers are increasing. We'll be monitoring this. So anybody, regardless if they're the point of contact for reserving ice time or a parent, would know that the coronavirus numbers are up, and that's something we take serious. Looking at reopening HOBS now or at the end of the year with the numbers that we have is very different than it was when we made the decision to close it. And we want to make sure that everybody's safe. So, I understand the frustration with closing it, but if we can help get the message out that we are starting to become concerned with safety, working with the health department, and if numbers were to increase again, that is something that I think if we can communicate that out, it's not a decision on HOBS, but at least it lets people know that stay tuned, that something is coming down the pike.
Thanks so much.
Sorry, Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Weld. Thank you, Ms. Giese and Mr. Solberg. This question is for Ms. Giese. The university has, decided to not have as many in-person classes and phase them out as much as possible this post-spring break, or this post-Thanksgiving. And then they've also decided to not have a spring break next year. And, it looks like February 1st is the date for classes to start for spring semester. So I guess we have like about a month and a half or 2 months where there may not be, very many people around campus. So I guess I just wanted to get your perspective on, how things are working at the university on kind of that typical time for them, but what we can come to expect maybe for the next month and a half, with maybe fewer people in town and university not being, as robust as usual.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Greger. We partner very closely with UW-Eau Claire, and we are in weekly meetings with them to do planning and implementation of the kinds of programs and initiatives that they have that intersect around COVID response, but then are on the phone with them almost daily around specific issues. They will be virtual through the rest of this semester, as you indicated. They still do have dorm residents. They still do have many off-campus students that are still here, and obviously many of their faculty and staff live in Eau Claire County. So that population will remain fairly sizable. And while some likely went home for the duration of the semester and through January, we know many are here in Eau Claire. The testing protocols that they have in place for their students, faculty, and staff are really connected to their strong intention to make sure that they quickly identify disease spread and isolate people and quarantine those close contacts. That will help us. So their testing protocols will continue, and we are anticipating that second semester will be in place with some requirements around testing before returning to campus or once people are back at campus. So that'll be a good thing. We anticipate, like we did in September, that we'll have potentially a small bump when more of the people that were away from Eau Claire return, just because of the additional population. But I don't anticipate that that's going to be as large as what happened initially the first couple of weeks of September. UW-Eau Claire is working hard to make sure that their faculty, staff, and students slow down COVID-19 spread.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Health Director Giese or City Manager Solberg? And I am not seeing any. Thank you both for all your work and your time and your dedication. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. There is a request to remove item 6 from the consent agenda for separate consideration. Do council members have questions regarding the remaining consent agenda items or wish to remove any other items for separate consideration? Seeing none, then on a motion by Councilmember Anderson and seconded by Councilmember Beaton, the consent agenda minus agenda item number 6 has been moved and discussion is in order. Is there any discussion? And again, seeing none, Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson? Aye. Beaton? Aye. Berge? Christopherson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Aye. Gregert? Gregert?
Aye.
Klinkhammer? Weld?
Aye.
Worthman? Zhang? Aye. That passes unanimously.
Thank you. Back to agenda item number 6 on the consent agenda. On a motion by Councilmember Berge and seconded by Councilmember Christopherson, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Then I'll be abstaining from this item, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Beaton? Aye. Berge? Christopherson?
Aye.
Gregert?
Aye.
Klinkhammer,
Aye.
Weld,
Aye.
Worthman,
Aye.
Jean, Anderson.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. There are no proclamations today, so we will move right into our business agenda, beginning with agenda item number 12. Which is a resolution extending the current health insurance plan with Group Health Cooperative of Eau Claire for 1 year. Good afternoon, Ms. Selton.
Good afternoon, Council President Weld and members of the council. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just have a few remarks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pete Farrell, the CEO of Group Health, and then he will also have a brief presentation. The City of Eau Claire has had a long-term mutually beneficial relationship with Group Health Cooperative. The city and Group Health have worked cooperatively together to find creative solutions to tackle rising health care costs. First slide, please. The average premium increase that the city has seen over the past 10 plus years with Group Health has been approximately 3.4%. Through Group Health's health promotion program, Teledoc, and Destination Medicine, these have all helped keep the city's premium increases over the years about 50% lower than Group Health's commercial line. Employees have the ability to earn their deductible back by participating in the health promotion program. There are no provider restrictions under the Group Health plan, and employees have access to all three of the primary medical healthcare provider networks in the area. While other neighboring local units of government have received initial renewal quotes of between 4% and 17%, causing many to have to make plan design changes and implement network restrictions to stay within budget parameters, the city has not had to do that. As you'll recall, since last year, we have implemented a direct primary care benefit for employees, and this has been a huge success. More than 90% of the city employees and their family members have switched to the DPC model, and both doctors are now on board, and the new facility is open in River Prairie. All services provided under the DPC model are at no additional cost, including some expanded services such as lab work, mole removal, cardiac stress tests, diabetes management, blood pressure and weight management, and the top 50 prescription drugs are dispensed on site at no additional charge. Additionally, instead of the average medical visit of about 15 minutes, DPC office visits typically run between 20 minutes and 40 minutes, and each DPC doctor has a patient load that is about 1/3 of the national average for doctor-patient ratios. The employee response to the DPC plan model has been very favorable. Once the employee establishes a relationship with a DPC doctor, they're still able to doctor at any other of the medical providers in the area for a copay of only $30 or a $10 copay to see a specialist with the DPC referral. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete Farrell, and then he will walk us through the proposed renewal for 2022.
Thank you, Ms. Selton. Good afternoon, Mr. Farrell.
Good afternoon. Thank you, President Weld and Ms. Selton for the introduction. I'm going to just kind of skip through the first few slides. Just the next slide, just our purpose statement, just a quick comment on that I like pointing out, one, our purpose statement is a very kind of living document for us. It's something that we reference every day in optimizing the health of our members. And also point out that while we provide health insurance, we're one of 2 organizations in the state that are authorized to provide health insurance, but we are not a health insurance company. We're actually licensed as a cooperative. And I think some of the results that Ms. Selton talked about and the way that we've approached things really kind of bear that out, that we have a much different member-focused perspective than a lot of health plans do. So with that, we can kind of skip ahead 2 slides to this one, just for your reference, Ms. Shelton kind of talked about the ability to earn back the deductible for the employees, and this is just a breakdown of how they would do that, various categories and activities, working with our health promotion coaches in not using tobacco, getting their preventive screening completed, completing a health risk assessment, and then having either their weight under control into what is a generous definition of a normal category, or completing an alternative program with our health promotion coaches. And then the next few slides look at kind of some of the metrics that we're taking and the results that we've had over the last several years. And certainly through the pandemic, this has been a challenging year for everybody. And I think that as we look at the results of overall BMI, to have slight improvement in the BMI in a year when people were asked to be not quite as active maybe as they could have been, or working from home, and it is amazing the temptation that everybody deals with when the pantry and the refrigerator are feet away instead of a mile or two away. That has an impact, and so to have this slight improvement in overall BMI is a big win, and our coaches were able to kind of modify the process that we go through to do more of it virtually, and I know as Selton pointed out, the direct primary care clinic, they did a fantastic job of kind of pivoting very quickly and being able to, as the model is built around, to provide more telephonic care and things like that, and more flexible care to kind of work with the patients involved. So let me skip ahead just a couple, 2 or 3, I guess, to blood pressure, because I like to point this one out. And these are just kind of the results for your reference there, and then there's a few of these that just kind of show you how we break that down, because we can measure it in 2 different ways. People getting to measure it through a BMI calculation, which is a formula of height and weight, but individuals that tend to be in pretty good shape and carry a lot more muscle than normal tend to have a higher than kind of range BMI, so that they can qualify with their body fat percentages. Firefighters especially like to point that out to us, and so they we have several different ways that they can meet those requirements. This one really is always worth pointing out. To have people with uncontrolled hypertension at 1.7% of the population, the typical working age population, about 17 to 18% have uncontrolled hypertension. So we're literally 1/10 of that, and over the time frame that that the last decade that we've we've been able to engage in this program, certainly having an impact on long-term health outcomes and reducing cardiac events and any kind of cardiovascular system related conditions. So this is an area where these health promotion programs have long-term payout and long-term benefit, and that's why sticking with them consistently really does make a difference, and we are seeing that benefit over time. And then just moving ahead, the next one just kind of shows people the percentages that actually lost weight and gained weight, and I think we kind of broke even there a little bit, I think, but overall. The next slide is a slightly more detailed summary of the first slide that Ms. Selton showed, of the history of the premium changes since we started this program more aggressively with the health promotion program and things like that in 2007. That middle number, the combined ratio, that's the total of the health care percentage of the costs and the administrative costs. The goal is for that to be right around 100 or 101% every year, and so we've done a pretty good job, noting that insurance obviously is going to absorb highs and lows along the way. But and this year, it's worth pointing out that these ratios are calculated with the reduction, as you all know, of 1 month of premium, because we had 2 premium holidays where we cut the premium in half for the months of, I believe it was technically April and May or June. I continue to be surprised that no other insurance company in the state has reduced premium during this year for large groups, medium and large groups. They've done it for small groups because they're required by law to give a certain percentage of that back if the costs aren't at a certain percentage. But large groups, insurers are not required to give that back. And you know, this amounted to an 8.5% reduction in the annual cost for the city. And like I said, this speaks to the culture of the cooperative and the nature of our relationship. We are truly cooperatively engaged with our member groups. And as I said, I told our team when we did the first premium reduction back in March when we announced it right away, I figured the entire industry would be doing something just like it. And they didn't, and nobody else did. So it's honestly, I think it's disappointing from an industry perspective, but one that I'm certainly willing to brag about. So, and then just kind of a quick summary of the renewal proposal that I think is in your resolution. It's a decrease of 1% for next year, and then a rate cap of 2%, which most rate caps are when insurers offer a rate cap guarantee, it's usually in the 5 to 10% range, somewhere in that. Right now, we're seeing trend probably in the 4 to 6% range, with a little bit of an unknown for next year because we don't know how much utilization is going to snap back after a year of depressed utilization and healthcare, kind of access. So that's the proposal. And then just the last slide that I have, which kind of looks historically, I looked on a graphical perspective of the blue is the actual costs to the city over time. That one dip in 2016-17, that was a half year that just gets measured because the city switched from a mid-year renewal to a calendar year renewal, so there was a reset, just kind of half-year measurement. But so the gold, or whatever color those are, they're almost flesh tone in the way this is working out on my screen, but the lighter box of those is the difference between what the premium actually is and what it would have been if it had continued along a typical trend and what the rest of our commercial block sees over time. And you know, the cumulative sum of those over time is $61 million now. So it's, you know, I can argue either way about the size of that number, but I think it's safe to say that either way, it's a sizable savings that the city is now experiencing due to I think really what is, and you know, as Ms. Selton commented, a partnership, and because it takes a lot of leadership within the city staff to kind of keep the health promotion program energized and moving forward, and cooperation with all the employees, as I said before, that they're coming in and they're doing the assessments and they're participating, and these activities really do make a difference, and we're seeing that there. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Are there any questions from council? And I do not see any. Again, a huge thank you to you and you know, to your organization and obviously to the other members that are a part of it, and a huge shout out to the employees of the city of Eau Claire, and as mentioned many times, that your efforts and your dedication to following, you know, the recommendations and ideas of good health is really been a huge advantage to everyone that's been a part of this program. And so really do want to thank you, Mr. Farrell, and your organization, and appreciate all the work that you do.
Thank you very much.
On a motion then by Council Vice President Emmanuel and seconded by Councilmember Gregor, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? And not seeing any. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Berge.
Aye.
Christopherson.
Aye.
Emmanuel. Bragert. Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang. Anderson. Aye. Beaton. Aye. That passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 13 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the 2021 Federal Transit Administration Section 5307 supplemental agreement between the City of Eau Claire and the City of Chippewa Falls. Good evening, Mr. Wagoner.
Thank you, Council President Weld. Is everybody able to hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. So this resolution will, before you today, authorizes the city manager to enter into an agreement with the City of Chippewa Falls for the City of Eau Claire, so that the City of Chippewa Falls can receive federal funding for their shared ride taxi system, both for operating and capital purchases. This is a yearly requirement of the Federal Transit Administration. If you happen to answer any questions.
Any questions from council? Again, any questions from council? I am not seeing any. Thank you. On a motion then by Councilmember Klinkhammer and seconded by Councilmember Worthman, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Christopherson.
Aye.
Emmanuel. Aye. Bragert. Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Beaton. Berge. Aye. And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 14 is a resolution adopting the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan for the Community Services Department Transit Division as required by the Federal Transit Administration. Again, good evening, Mr. Wagoner.
President Weld. So this resolution will adopt the, Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan for the Transit Division. This is a new requirement of the Federal Transportation Administration. The plan included in your packets formalizes safety practices that Eau Claire Transit has incorporated over the years, and its design was based on a template provided by the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. The Transit Commission passed a motion to recommend that the council adopt the plan at its November meeting. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this.
Thank you. Any questions from council? I'll ask if there are any questions from council. I'm not seeing any. Thank you. On a motion by Councilmember Zhang and seconded by Councilmember Anderson, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Emmanuel. Aye. Bragert. Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman. Zhang. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Beaton. Aye. Berge. Christopherson.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 15 is a resolution adopting the 5-year transit development plan for the Community Services Department Transit Division. Mr. Wagoner, do you have any additional information to add from last night's presentation?
Just that the Transit Commission passed a motion to recommend the adoption of the plan at its November meeting, in that a full presentation of the plan was given to the Transit Commission at the October meeting.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Wagoner? Again, I'll ask if there are any questions. Not seeing any. On a motion then by Councilmember Beaton and seconded by Councilmember Berge, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Christopherson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Mr. Wagner, for presenting this very dynamic 5-year plan for development of our transit services in Eau Claire. The only comment I would make is that I would certainly encourage the adoption of those short-range terms. I don't know if there's any question about support for those within our community, but I think that we are really ready to move along and discover how we can make this service more broadly available to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Christopherson. Councilmember Gregor.
Well, I just wanted to, speak a little bit about this, since I was quite involved with the process, serving the Transit Commission, attending a number of the open houses and participating in the surveys, hearing from a lot of folks, and just want to show my appreciation to Mr. Wagner and the committee that worked on this, and our consultants with SRF. And our chair of our Transit Commission, Bob Schraufnagel. I think it's a pretty well done plan. I think it lays out a lot of great options for the city, and it's nice to have some that don't cost a ton of money, and also ones that allow us to dream a little bit and maybe change some priorities to make some investments, and also really stress to our state legislature and that we need more funding to operate transit. We really haven't had an increase in our transit service significantly in like over 20 years now. We've had a pretty similar route structure. I think the plan did a really good job of presenting the information and being, it's obviously pretty lengthy, but I think it actually really needed to be that almost 300 pages to capture all of the great ideas that are out there. I think the maps were really pretty captivating and clear, and I think they're useful for other aspects of planning for our city. I spoke with one resident on the south side who rode the bus a lot in the 1970s, and they actually read this whole plan, and we had a good hour-long conversation about it, and they were really impressed with how far transit has come in our city, and really what we could do in the future. Appreciated the outreach efforts that the consultants in particular helped spur along with different stakeholders. I think there's a lot of outreach that'll need to be done for the implementation part of this. I think we all kind of understand that, and there could be more data collection that would be needed too. Particularly, if we're going to change a route, we might want to do another round of data collection to see where people are getting on and off. We were fortunate in that way, I guess, that we had the data collection done right before the pandemic, so we have a snapshot that's pretty accurate. Just a few highlights that I'm excited about. The routes 1 and 6, servicing the mall area, like some of the ideas to streamline those routes and create better access. And later night service are really great. The Altoona partnership, seeing if we can increase that to an hour-long route. Routes 3 and 4, like if folks haven't looked closely at that or need any help understanding it, feel free to give me a call. On the north side, there's, creating a bi-directional part of the city where two different routes are going in different directions. It's going to be a process to try to implement that, but I think it would really be worthwhile. And then Route 9, and 19, having evening service for the university, I think could be a game changer, because I think there's a number of students that will choose to drive and park in the neighborhood because they need to get somewhere in the evening, or they need to stay on campus for the evening to participate in extracurricular activities. So I think having bus service there could really help students and faculty and the neighborhoods. There's some cool ideas like the transit signal priority idea of like how we can have traffic signals be able to be changed. If a transit bus was running behind, maybe they could change the signal so they can get through faster. Kind of a cool idea. And the marketing and communication side of things, I think there's a lot of work that can be done there, and I can kind of save that for later, but something the Transit Commission can work on. I do have a couple concerns, like going into the implementation. There's, the on-demand thing is going to have to be done carefully, obviously, and I wouldn't want to think it'd be easier for us to move in that direction versus, actually filling the buses we do have running on fixed routes. So I'd rather find ways to fix routes going, but using on-demand to maybe add some additional service, particularly in the northwest side of the city. Another thing that we've struggled with is just access to big box stores, and there's a reference to Route 1, moving, to Mall Drive and not going through the Festival Foods lot. I have some concerns about that, continuing to move transit service away from grocery stores. We no longer go through Target, for example. Just need to figure out ways to create better pedestrian connections at the very least to those stores. But yeah, overall, I think it's a tremendous plan. Really appreciate everybody's work that went into it. I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councilmember McGregor. Councilmember Berge.
And I also will be supporting this plan. I think it's a great plan. Councilmember McGregor took time to walk me through it, so I'm appreciative of that. Probably hour-long conversation. I just want to highlight, too, the connection to Altoona. Whenever transit, when Eau Claire Transit comes up, Altoona, in my conversation, always comes up as well, conversations. Through my work with the Affordable Housing Solar Circle, we talked about Eau Claire Transit, and I know, as Mr. Roth talked about last night, it's needed over there, and I'm glad to see the plan includes that, and I think that's really important, and I think it's important for a plan to be responsive to the community, which is what this plan is. So I will enthusiastically support it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Berge. Any other discussion? And again, I'll ask if there's any other discussion. Not seeing any. Yes, again, a big thank you to everyone that's helped put this project together. This will be a work in progress, and I'm certain that we're gonna continue to see our transit program continue to grow and develop. So appreciate all the work. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Gregert.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Jean? Anderson? Aye. Eaton? Aye. Berge? Christopherson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Aye. And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 16 is a resolution accepting the comprehensive parking study update. Ms. Ness, do you have any additional information you would like to add to last night's presentation?
Just in regards to Councilmember Greger's question last night, we do have additional outreach planned with the acceptance of the comprehensive study update with the neighborhoods and the institutions to get more information related to the institutions' parking policies. And we'll work with both the neighborhoods and the institutions to find that parking balance in those neighborhoods.
Thank you, Ms. Ness. Are there any questions from council in regards to last night's presentation? Councilmember Greger.
Thank you, President Weld, and thank you, Ms. Ness. I appreciate the follow-up on that. I guess my question, I recall when we were, prioritizing funding for this plan, there was, it was kind of partly in the context of looking at parking needs for, downtown and the future of parking structures and like how we're going to afford, to replace things like the Gibson ramp so I guess I'm not sure if the plan really is conclusive about, anything like that. So I was wondering what your takeaways are, or Mr. Solberg, or maybe the consultant is on the line too. But what does this really say so far about, the potential need to invest in parking ramps downtown?
I can start with addressing that, Councilmember Greger, and then I'll hand it over to our consultant that's on the line, Nicole Chinya. They gave us a couple different alternatives at looking at the parking walk distances to the facilities in the downtown and helping us look at using this tool to look at potential locations for parking structures within the downtown. So with that information and information that we have within our economic development group on number of employees and demand at different locations in the downtown, we can use this information to cite potential parking structures within the area. Again, this is something that we would work with the business districts and get their feedback as well. But we do have the tools that the consultant gave us to further look into identifying potential locations. Ms. Chania, do you have anything to add to that?
That was great. I do. I just want to add, in regard to the immediate need for a parking facility, the study didn't dive deep into that because the supply and demand didn't warrant that immediate need. And so while it's down the road in the future, the things like technology and organizational management were a higher priority in the study as far as the recommendations are concerned. In the longer term recommendations, we did mention some construction phasing and partner impact activities that need to happen, as Lee has mentioned, as far as, where does this go, who does this impact, and how does that look like? But that was in the longer term recommendations mentioned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Councilmember Greger, did you have another question?
Yeah. Thank you, President Weld. My other question was about I was intrigued by one of the references in the plan to the city of Oshkosh. It was nice to hear a bit about what other cities do. They have a volunteer program for enforcement of parking, and I guess I was wondering if you knew more about how that worked, and if you see that as an opportunity for Eau Claire. I know I've heard about a downtown ambassador program that's getting started, and obviously we have neighborhood associations, and some members may actually find it a pleasure to do parking enforcement perhaps in their neighborhood. So just wanted to get some perspective of just that city's Oshkosh volunteer program for enforcement and how you could see something like that work here.
Yes, great. Oh, Leah, did you want to take that first?
No, go ahead.
Sorry. So yeah, we did reference Oshkosh. I am very familiar with that type of program in multiple cities, and I actually ran and implemented one in the city of Houston. They are very well received on organizations that are very spread out as far as their parking supply, similar to the 3 different areas in Eau Claire. So I think that it's something that we can definitely explore as we get a little bit more organized and instill the technology and the resources to be able to enforce effectively.
So just as a follow-up to that, if that's all right.
Certainly.
How does the one at Oshkosh work exactly?
So there is a team of volunteers. The city trains them and kind of arms them, so to speak, with ticket books. I don't know which tickets those volunteers can or cannot write, but usually it's limited. They don't give them totally free rein. And then the citations are uploaded into the management system of the city. So there's regular scheduled meetings and trainings that usually happen with those type of programs.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? I do not see any. Thank you, Ms. Chania and Ms. Ness. On a motion then by Councilmember Christopherson and seconded by Council Vice President Emmanuel, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Wall. I'm sorry to take so much time. I wasn't sure who was going to speak, but I just wanted to make sure I got a word in on this one. I think, I was a little skeptical about spending money on a plan like this at the beginning, and I guess I still have some skepticism about it, although, some of the information I think is useful. I just don't feel like I learned a lot from it, and there's just so many steps in the future, and maybe that's a lot of what this is about, is kind of the strategic plan piece of it, where we look at the technology and the organizational priorities that Ms. Jania mentioned as really the kind of the things that bubble up to the top. So I guess it's just it's hard to know there's so much work ahead. I think there's some areas that I think we need to study more. Like this plan did not, study the impact of a Pablo Center event on downtown. The city hall was not operating at the time of any of the studies, and it feels like the Mayo parking situation, in terms of the usage of their lots is an important context that would be good to bring in a bit more. And it just seemed like it was a bit light on recommendations that were actually really that specific. Particularly like with the residential parking permits for the neighborhoods, it really just to study the appropriateness of doing that. So it didn't really make a lot of progress there, although I really appreciate the fact that, you know, when this plan was first brought up, it was mostly going to be a downtown plan. And you know, I encouraged, and I think others did too, that we include, you know, parts of the Third Ward and Randall Park, you know, to focus on the impact of institutions like Mayo and the university. So I appreciate the flexibility that went into this to be able to kind of spread the work out a little bit more. You know, one of the recommendations is related to having a full-time parking manager, which I do think would be good to make sure that there's a really good coordination. But as I brought up a couple of other times, I really think we need a bigger lens with that type of thing too, where we consider having a mobility coordinator that really looks at how, you know, transit and biking and walking and driving can all fit together and are, you know, make sure that they're kind of building off of each other in a more sustainable way. So there's a lot of education and outreach that goes into all of this, I think. And that whole marketing piece, you know, there's some good ideas in there for the marketing and making sure we have a good website. But I do think it would be really cool if, like, whenever someone finds parking information, they're also being led to transit information for those same destinations or those same types of places that they want to go to. Because, in fact, if you look at those maps, which are really nice maps, I always enjoy maps, the bus transit center is, like, located in the exact part of the downtown that has the most, like, on-street parking demand, like South Barstow. So I think that's a huge opportunity. The more we can get people on the bus downtown, the more we alleviate some of the parking pressure in the most important area to relieve it. And then our institutions like Mayo and the County Government Center and the university all have really good bus routes going by them already. So how do we kind of capture, you know, people's imaginations, I guess, about how they can get places other than driving at the same time as we relay good parking information. So obviously there's a lot of work ahead, and this plan kind of eaches us a little further, but so I'll plan on supporting it just because, you know, it helps us move forward, but at the same time I was hoping for us to get a little further with it, but those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gregor. Any other discussion from council? Again, any other discussion? I am not seeing any. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman. Jean. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Beaton. Aye. Berge. Aye. Christofferson.
Aye.
Emmanuel. Gregert.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 17 is a resolution approving a site plan in a P Public District to allow for Phase 2 of the Transportation Education Center for Chippewa Valley Technical College. Mr. Allen, do you have any additional information you wish to add to last night's presentation?
Good afternoon, Council President Wild and members of the council. I do not have anything additional at this time. There's some questions about some of the proposed sidewalk and trail connections within the project and the timing thereof, but I'll turn that over to others on the council as part of your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Are there any questions from council? Again, I'll ask if there are any questions. Seeing none, I'm sorry. Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Weld. I guess I just wanted to follow up and see if there had been any more discussion about the intersection that that kind of needs to get squared up, in my opinion, I guess, with regard to the four-way stop, to see if there's anything from Mr. Bagley or Mr. Allen about that. If there's any, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's something we need to like amend. It's just something to call out as something that maybe could be improved.
Sure. No, good point. I believe Mr. Bagley and Mr. Lambert referred to the questions last night. I do see Mr. Bagley is on the line here if there's a specific question for him as one of the applicant representatives.
Mr. Bagley, are you there? Mr. Bagley?
Yes, I'm online. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further in addition, no other thoughts other than what we discussed last night in terms of marking. I think Mr. Lambert did suggest, and we do have some future plans in the not too distant future to rework that road through the campus. And I think at the time we would remove that fuel island, that would be a good opportunity to square up that intersection. And we would certainly consider that, when we get to that point with the improvements of the road.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bagley. Any other questions from council? I am not seeing any. On a motion then by Councilmember Gregor and seconded by Councilmember Klinkhammer, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Weld. I wanted to discuss this, obviously at the Plan Commission there was a condition added to include a sidewalk in the future along the eastern side of the road within the campus, up north to the city-owned campus road. I think the exact location was chosen after the motion, but we saw a drawing presented last night. I feel, particularly since there's, semi-trailer traffic as well as, an increase in automobile traffic going in and out of the campus, and potentially a future trail along campus road along a primary bicycle route to the city. It would be good to connect that sidewalk. And, having visited the site yesterday, or not yesterday, but Saturday, there is room for it, and it seems like it just makes sense to do it right away as part of when all this other construction was occurring. So I'd like to make a motion, so rather than have that sidewalk completed in the future, just to have it included with the site plan in front of us today.
I'd like to second that, Council President.
So we have a motion then by Councilmember Gregor and seconded by Councilmember Worthman. Is there any additional comments, Councilmember Gregor?
I guess the only thing is if there is a way to show the image of what I'm talking about with regard to that sidewalk, in case anyone needs a refresher of it. I'm not sure if that's handy, but because I don't believe it's in the packet. Just in case that's helpful for people.
I'm sorry, what? Councilmember Gregor, is that the image that you were looking for?
Well, I think there's some way of having it be. I don't think this is it, but there was a PDF that was shared with me via email that was also zoomed in pretty far. basically, I could describe it too. There's basically on the west side of the Energy Education Center, there's a greenhouse, and there's in the campus road that goes north and south that's owned by CBTC, and the idea would be to put the sidewalk on the east side of that road and to the west of the greenhouse and connect north and south through the project all the way up to Campus Road to the north.
Okay, Councilmember Worthman.
Thank you, Council President Weld. I kind of see two major things with this. One is that there is going to be an increased amount of traffic along the road that goes between both buildings, which I think is going to be, especially with semis, is going to be really helpful to have a pedestrian access. The other thing is that the likelihood of trail or sidewalk or combination of both along Campus Road is very high. And, I think especially again, if there are times when students accessing the college or other events are happening and potentially there's even parking that happens up along that road, it just makes it a lot safer to have the ability to walk into the campus. So I think both the connectivity and the increased amount of traffic that's going to happen necessitate, this, and it's probably a fraction of the overall expense of this entire project anyway. So to me, it does make sense to put it in now.
Thank you, Councilmember Worthman. Councilmember Christopherson.
Thank you, President Weld. I have to start with a little confusion because on my iPad I could never get a really good view of these site maps, and then eventually it would just dump. So I would like to just refer to the conversation that we had at the Plan Commission meeting. CVTC is very willing to put the sidewalk in, but there is not a location to connect to at this point. So they were willing to draw in the sidewalk as a placeholder and good faith promise that the sidewalk would be there. And their idea in conversation at the Plan Commission was that there is not at this point and during construction a lot of pedestrian traffic, and that bike path is not in. So it feels to me like we are both on the same page, but I would not support the amendment because I would prefer to support what the plan is for CVTC and their vision and the promise that connectivity would come at the appropriate time. So with this map, I'm not exactly sure. Part of the connectivity between the two sites, the energy and the transportation, has been discussed earlier. And then this sidewalk connection that was talked about at Plan Commission goes towards the road that doesn't have a sidewalk along it anyway. So I appreciate Mr. Greigert's interest in connectivity and pedestrian traffic, but I think that the timing is appropriate to just hold this sidewalk as part of the end plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Christopherson. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Seeing none, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Weld,
No.
Worthman,
Aye.
Zhang, Anderson, aye. Beaton, aye. Berge, Christopherson,
No.
Ms. Riepel, we seem to have lost. Ms. Riepel? Ms. Riepel, are you there?
Sorry, my internet blinked out on me for a second.
Okay.
Emmanuel.
Aye, and I'm sympathetic. I get it.
Gregert.
Aye.
Klinkhammer. All right, that passes 2, 3, 4 on a vote of 6-4.
Thank you. So back to the original resolution with the amendment. Is there any additional discussion? Again, I'll ask if there's any additional discussion. Seeing none, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Worthman. John. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Beaton. Aye. Berge. Christofferson.
Aye.
Emmanuel. Aye. Gregert. Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 18 is a resolution approving appointments and reappointments to various boards, commissions, and committees. The Advisory Committee on Appointments met on Monday, November 30th, 2020, to consider appointments to the various boards, commissions, and committees. And I will share those with you. Again, beginning with our Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, a new appointment to Douglas Dobson, and a reappointment to Ann Francis and J.J. Henriksen. This Eau Claire City County Board of Health, a reappointment as a city-county joint appointment to a 5-year term for Mary Price. For the Landmarks Commission, a new appointment to a 3-year term to expire December 31st for 2023 for David Barnes. For the Redevelopment Authority, a reappointment to a 5-year term to expire December 31st, 2025 to Dr. Thomas Kemp. The Senior Center Board, a new appointment to a 2-year term to expire December 31st, 2022 to Brian Bessa, and a reappointment to a 2-year term to expire December 31st, 2022 to Steve Anderson and Geraldine Kinderman. For the South Barstow Business Improvement District, a reappointment to a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2023 to Jason John Anderson, Benny Haas, Reverend Scott Kirby, and Matt Pavich. The Transit Commission, a new appointment to an unexpired 1-year term to expire August 31st, 2021 of the UW Eau Claire Student Senate Representative, Lauren Becker. For Waterways and Parks Commission, a new appointment to a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2023 to Megan Holmes, Christopher Johnson, and Joseph Maurer, and a reappointment to a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2023 to Kirk Dahl. For the West Grand Avenue Business Improvement District, a reappointment to a 2-year term to expire December 31st, 2022 to Dan Deffenbach, Laura Geronimo, Jack Tim, and Webb Hart. And lastly, the Zoning Board of Appeals, a reappointment to a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2023 to William Betcher and David Nelson. Are there any questions from council? Councilmember Worthman. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, On a motion then by Councilmember Worthman and seconded by Councilmember Zhang, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Worthman.
For the floor, and I just want to reiterate how important these boards, committees, and commissions are for our city. And we have incredible people serving on well over a dozen different boards, committees, and commissions that decide everything from how we do where development projects happen, to where new parks could be placed in our community, to thinking through all of our different policies around whether it's our sustainability commission or even our affordability of housing. We really rely on the expertise of our community to help make these important decisions. And so I just want to encourage people to apply. It doesn't take that long. If you put in an application, you can check the different committees and commissions that you would like to serve on, and share what your perspective is and what you would like to see in our community. And we take that all into consideration. So just to encourage folks to apply. It's a really wonderful thing that we have people in our community willing to help serve and really guide our community as we're deciding policies for the future and how to make Eau Claire a better place.
Thank you, Councilmember Worthman. Councilmember Berge.
Thank you, Council President. I really echo what Councilmember Worthman just said. I was going to say the same thing. He beat me to it, but I just want to underline that we do need people to apply. And if anyone who's listening or watches this later, you just look up Citizen Resource Bank. That's what it's called. So even if you Google Citizen Resource Bank and put Eau Claire afterwards, I tried it out and it brings you right to the page. Otherwise, if you go to the city's website and put that in the search bar, Citizen Resource Bank, it'll pop up. The other thing that I also want to emphasize is I have a goal, and I think this council, not speak for council, but I know council has a goal that our boards and commissions would represent the diversity of Eau Claire. And so we really want a diverse pool of applicants too, and that's age, race, culture, everything, religion, however you want to see, geographical, Northsiders, geographical, however you define diversity and see that. It would be great if our boards and commissions could represent our citizens and residents of Eau Claire. So please apply. I want also to do an update about what we talked. January, usually on the coldest day of the year, we have a breakfast appreciation for our boards and commissions volunteers. And because of this little thing called COVID, we can't do that this year. But we're going to, it'll look a little different. We're still going to give out the thanks, just not the breakfast in January, but stay tuned for another event when it's safe to gather. Because it's important to thank our volunteers for taking their time to volunteer their time. So thanks all.
Thank you, Councilmember Berge. Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you to President Weld, and I want to thank my colleagues on the Appointments Committee. I wanted to speak specifically to the appointment for Transit Commission, since I serve on that commission and haven't talked enough about transit yet today. But Lauren Becker, who's a student at the university, I think one of the best decisions we've made as a city is to have students specifically have a student seat on Transit Commission. Maybe we should consider it for other commissions, because we really get some of the most accomplished and engaged students at the university to participate. And Lauren just received one of our Sustainable Eau Claire Awards for student leadership, and is the director of the Student Office of Sustainability. And I'm sure we'll do a great job on Transit Commission. So just kind of wanted to highlight that as an example of the diversity that we need to really make our commissions the best they can be. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Councilmember Greggert. Yeah, again, another huge shout out to the 175 volunteers that are already participating, and certainly encouraging more and more residents of the city of Eau Claire to get involved in municipal governing. And I can't say it enough. There's a great reward that comes with it, from within yourselves. And for that reason alone, it becomes a good use of our time and a great service to our community. So I encourage everyone to get involved. So thank you, everyone. With that, Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Jean? Aye. Anderson? Aye. Beaton? Aye. Berge? Christofferson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Greggert? Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Workman? That passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 19 is a resolution creating a new voting ward within the city of Eau Claire. Ms. Repo.
That creates Ward 83 as a result of the annexation under the ordinances to follow.
Great. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Repo from council? And again, any questions? Not seeing any. On a motion by Councilmember Anderson and seconded by Councilmember Beaton, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson? Aye. Beaton? Aye. Berge? Christofferson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Aye. Greggert?
Aye.
Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Worthman?
Aye.
Jean? And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 20 is a resolution authorizing remote attendance at City Council and public meetings. Again, good evening, Mr. Solberg.
Thank you. The resolution before you would authorize the remote meeting attendance for City Council and public meetings for the city in the same manner that has been held since the early days of the pandemic. A charter ordinance amendment was adopted on September 22nd, 2020, allowing meetings to be conducted virtually during emergency conditions, and that amendment took effect 60 days after its passage and publication, which the effective date was November 21st, 2020. Pursuant to that ordinance now in effect, City Council may determine it is necessary for public health and safety to convene meeting virtually for a time period not to exceed the emergency conditions or in any event for the next 90 days, unless extended by subsequent resolutions. The attached resolution makes this determination and extends the current resolution ordering virtual meetings for 90 days, which will be beyond December 31st, 2020. The first resolution authorizing remote city council meetings was passed on October 27th, 2020. That is set to expire December 31st, 2020. This resolution before you today will carry the city council, or the public meetings remote attendance authorization through the March 9th, 2021 council meeting. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Solberg. Are there any questions from council? Again, I'll ask if there are any questions from council. And not seeing any. Thank you. On a motion then by Councilmember Berge and seconded by Councilmember Christofferson, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Beaton? Aye. Berge?
Aye.
Christopherson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Aye. Braegert? Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Worthman?
Aye.
Zhang? Anderson? Aye. That passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 21 is an ordinance annexing land to the City of Eau Claire located at 2166 Preston Road, Town of Union, Eau Claire County, as shown on planning drawing number 27-7A. Per Wisconsin statutes, an annexation ordinance requires 2/3 vote of the elected members. Therefore, 8 affirmative votes of the 11 council members are required. Mr. Allen, good evening.
Good evening, Council President Weld and members of the council. Thank you for that slide. This is item number 7 on this map, again reflecting the Planning Commission agenda from their meeting last week, where they did recommend approval before you here today. The next slide shows a little bit more specifically the property in question off Preston Road on the east side there, certainly adjacent to current City of Eau Claire city limits. It is located in the Town of Union. Existing land use is single-family homes. Go to the next slide, please. This shows a little bit more specifically the aerial photo as it relates to the surrounding area. The area is plus or minus 1 acre in size. And again, the owner has submitted a petition for annexation of the single-family home and balance of vacant land located at 2611 Preston Road, which is located in the Town of Union. Again, the property is located in the sewer service area of the City of Eau Claire, and the request is to connect to city sewer and water, which is available along the street there. The request is consistent with comprehensive plan for low-density residential development in this area. So again, with that, Planning Commission has recommended approval before you here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Are there any questions from council? Again, I'll ask, are there any questions in regards to the annexation? I am not seeing any. On a motion then by Council Vice President Emmanuel and seconded by Councilmember Greigert, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? And not seeing any. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Berge? Aye. Christopherson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Aye. Braegert? Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Worthman?
Aye.
Zhang? Aye. Anderson? Aye. Beaton? Aye. And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 22, it is an ordinance annexing land to the City of Eau Claire located at 2929 Orange Street, Town of Washington, Eau Claire County, as shown on planning drawing number 20-8A. Per Wisconsin statutes, an annexation ordinance requires 2/3 vote of the elected members. Therefore, 8 affirmative votes of the 11 elected council members are required. Again, good evening, Mr. Allen.
Again, good evening. Yes, thank you, Council President Weld. Again, this item here is on the other end of the City of Eau Claire, adjacent to city boundaries, as shown as number 8 here. Again, referencing the Planning Commission agenda from their meeting last week. Go to the next slide, please. This property is located on Orange Street, specifically 2929 Orange Street in the Town of Washington. The existing land use is a single-family home. Let's go to the next slide, please. here shows, again, the aerial photo in relation to the other properties surrounding it. The owner has submitted a petition for annexation of this approximately 0.7 acre property, which does consist, as you see here, of a single-family home in the town of Washington. Property is located within a sewer service area in the city of Eau Claire. The purpose for the request to annex is that the current septic system is in the process of failing as we speak. In fact, the owner and occupant were unable to participate in the public hearing at Planning Commission last week because they were unable to reside at the residence currently. They were living off-site temporarily while they address this emergency issue. So again, the request is certainly consistent with the comprehensive plan as well as low-density residential. Both staff and the Planning Commission recommend approval of the annexation so the property owner can access city utilities, particularly related to their septic system failings currently. With that, I'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Are there any questions from council? Again, I'll ask if there are any questions from council in regards to the annexation. Seeing none, on a motion then by Councilmember Klinkhammer and seconded by Councilmember Worthman, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Christopherson?
Aye.
Emmanuel? Emmanuel? Aye. Gregert?
Aye.
Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Worthman?
Aye.
Zhang? Anderson? Aye. Eaton? Aye. Berge? And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 23 is a charter ordinance relating to the City Council and reapportionment of the aldermanic districts of the City of Eau Claire. Adoption of a charter ordinance requires a 2/3 vote of the elected members. Therefore, 8 affirmative votes are required of the 11 elected council members. Does council have any additional questions for Ms. Riepel from last night's presentation? Not seeing any. On a motion then by Councilmember Zhang and seconded by Councilmember Anderson, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? And seeing none, City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Emmanuel? Aye. Gregert? Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Worthman? Zhang? Aye. Anderson? Aye. Beaton? Berge? Aye. Christopherson?
Aye.
And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 24 is an ordinance temporarily amending the City of Eau Claire Employee Benefits and Leaves Plan. Does council have any questions for Ms. Selton from last night's presentation? Again, not seeing any questions. On a motion then by Councilmember Beaton and seconded by Councilmember Berge, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Again, apologize for the delay. My internet was not allowing me to unmute, so I apologize for that. I will certainly be supporting this evening. I think it's imperative that the city administration and employees have another tool in the toolbox I am concerned, though, that this really on the idea of leave debt that employees may be accruing because of the pandemic. I think all units of government are in a little bit of a pickle until we figure out what Congress is going to do or not going to do. And so while I'm supporting this today, pending what happens at the federal level, I may be interested in having a more generous leave provision. If Congress comes through and offers another 80 hours similar to what they did for the calendar year of 2020, I think that's just fine. But if it's not enough of a provision, I think that we should revisit this and see if there's anything more generous that we can do to really help the city employees through this unprecedented time.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Is there any other discussion? I'm going to ask if there's any other discussion. I'm not seeing any. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Greigert.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Jean. Anderson.
Aye.
Beaton.
Aye.
Berge. Christofferson.
Aye.
Emmanuel.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously.
Thank you. We have one ordinance for introduction. Agenda item number 25 is an ordinance rezoning property located at the 700 block of Water Street, known as the Water Street Flats, from RM to CBDP, and to adopt the general development plan for 2 multi-level apartment buildings. Does council wish to suspend the rules and take up any of these ordinances this evening? And I do not see any desire to do so. That will bring us to announcements. And Interim City Manager Solberg.
Thank you. I just have a few announcements today. Tomorrow from 4 until 6:30, there will be a Library Plaza open house. As people well know, there is a very exciting library renovation and expansion project planned. This is for the plaza that will be outside of the library, between the library and City Hall. So there'll be formal presentations at 4, 5, and 6, and then a chance to ask questions and provide feedback after each short presentation. On December 18th, there is a Chamber Eggs and Issues for the legislative preview. Let Kathy Marole know if anybody's interested in signing up for that. Just a reminder, there will be no public hearings or legislative meeting on December 21st and December 22nd. They were canceled previously this year by City Council resolution. Just a short announcement with the engineering division. With the term that I am helping in the city manager's office as interim city manager, Leah Ness is assuming more leadership responsibility in the engineering department, and she will be serving as the acting city engineer as we enter the busy engineering season with outreach and street hearings for the upcoming CIP program. So you'll be seeing more of Leah at meetings, and I'm very appreciative and confident in her abilities for that. I would like to say thank you again to all the citizens and residents who have volunteered for the boards and commissions. It was an entertaining and informative process looking at the public record with the advisory commission last week, and it's very humbling to see the number of people interested in helping the city, and I'm appreciative that people are helping out. And lastly, I'd like to express season greetings and happy holidays to City Council and to city staff and residents through the end of the year, that they have a safe end to 2020 and look forward to 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Solberg. I have one announcement in regards to the task force for communicable disease ordinance that we'll be starting our work on in the new year. The City County Board of Health will be meeting tomorrow to review and discuss a proposed list of participants that have volunteered to serve on that task force. Upon the Board of Health's recommendation to move forward with that list, that list will then be provided sent to Mr. Solberg and to Health Director Giese on Thursday. At which time then, either Thursday or Friday, there will be another public announcement just informing every one of those that have agreed to serve on that task force over the next 6 months, which, again, we greatly appreciate their service. Early in January, it is the intent then that council will gather in a work session to talk about engagement and about the process moving forward with that task force as well. So. And with that, if there are any other announcements from council, and I do not see any, I will also express a warm and happy holiday. I can't emphasize enough that we all still stay strong and stay safe and stay healthy. Enjoy the time that we have with our family and look forward to getting back together again in January. Happy holidays, and we'll see everyone soon. And if there is no objection from council, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFB 101.9